Good evening. I'm
That's funny.
pleased to open up the special meeting for the Ames City Council for June 18th. And the order of business tonight, the first thing we have is a passage of ordinance. And then we're going to move on to a presentation on community development block grant. And there will be we've asked it to be limited to 60 minutes or less. And then we'll move on to rental housing. And when we get to rental housing, we'll go ahead and talk about the order of conversation on that item. So item 1, second passage of ordinance amending chapter 22 of the Ames Municipal Code regarding deferral of infrastructure and improvements. Entertain a motion.
1 second.
Second.
Move seconded. Discussion. Roll call.
Aye.
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 Aye. Aye.
Thank you. All right. Item 2, proposed 2019 to 2023 community development block grant consolidated plan and priority goals. So Miss Vanessa, and if you would introduce your.
I will. Thank you, Mayor and Council. I did cut the slides down a lot. But with me tonight is Nora Lodger-Hodson. She's the Assistant Scientist with the Institute for Design and Research and Outreach with Iowa State University. Nora worked with me 5 years ago when we did our consolidated plan and was able to get the job contracted again this year. So we're glad to be working together again. I think she's glad.
Yeah.
Also, we just want to say for the audience and those who always support coming out to our CDBG public forums and so forth, that our schedule is a little off. Normally, we would have had a second public forum, but both Nora and I had some family emergencies that kind of changed our schedule a little bit. And so we apologize for not being able to get that second round in. So with that, we'll get started with our presentation. And what we're going to do first tonight is kind of go over the data for putting together the consolidated plan and the analysis of impediments to the Fair Housing Choice Survey. And then from there, we will go into our council action form, but we wanted to make sure you saw the data before you saw our recommendations. Okay, and the purpose of it, again, is the requirement of the consolidated plan is because we are a home and CDBG entitlement community. We have to put together a comprehensive plan that looks at our jurisdiction for the next 5 years as what our goals and priorities are going to be for our CDBG and home programs. And then also as a requirement, we have to also conduct an analysis of impediments to fair housing, which is a requirement of entitlements to make sure that our CDBG funds are not being used discriminatorily and that we are making an effort to identify impediments or barriers in the community so that we're providing decent, safe, and affordable housing to everyone. And this also includes having a limited English proficiency policy, which we will be bringing to you later on this summer. Okay, just for discussion purposes and letting you know, the majority of our data came from the American Community Survey and the CHAS data. We'll be talking about that a little bit more in detail. But so that everyone understands that for updating our consolidated plan, that it includes students living on campus, excluding dormitories, and off campus are included in the household data. So people know when they see numbers, it includes students except for those in dormitories. I just wanted to make that clear because a lot of people think we're just focusing on families, but HUD uses households. Okay, we just wanted to talk about what our methodology was and what sources that we use. Again, we use survey and input. We did mail survey online, some face-to-face interviews, and then we did that first public forum with council back in December. We also reviewed some public and private sector data and documents like the City of Ames Planning and Housing Department and Division. We used work with the Institute of Community Alliance that does all the homeless data for the state. We got workforce data, the Iowa Finance Authority, the Central Iowa Regional Housing Authority, Story County Asset, and the Iowa Coalition Against Sexual Assault. So that includes part of our data source. And then the use of data to be more descriptive. We use the American Community Survey, which we refer throughout as the ACS. And that data is from 2013 to 2017. That is the most recent data that's available. And HUD used this data as well. And we also use data from the Comprehensive Housing Affordability Strategy, which is our CHAS data. And that data time frame is 2011 to 2015. So if numbers have changed from that, this is what we're required to use, the most current data, and this is what HUD has put in parts of our system. We also use data from the Iowa Workforce Development for 17, 18, and 19. We use data from the Bureau of Labor and Statistics for 2019. Again, we use data from SERHA and all the other agencies, building inspections, division, chamber, and the city assessor's office. So those are all the sources that we utilize, plus other conversations we capture data from as well. Okay, the CHAS data. The CHAS data, again, is supplied by HUD. Again, it's 2011 to 2015. And the CHAS data basically covers income distribution by households, which includes students, except for dormitories. It includes housing problems. It includes severe problems by households, cost burdens, income by housing problem, and occupied housing by tenure. So that's the information that the CHAS data covers in the system. Also for the ACS, it covers population, income, race, education, occupation, renter, owner, and housing units. And I just want to note again for people who are looking at data that the 2008 population data is available for Ames, which is now 67,154. But for this report, we're using the 2017 population of 6,505 in order to match the household data that's only available for 2013 to 2017. So it hasn't caught up, only the population side. Okay, and also for our analysis of impediment study, the groups we surveyed was what we call the housing producer group that include renters, realtors, rental managers, developers, lenders, housing service providers. Then we surveyed general renters. We also surveyed subsidized housing renters, elderly renters, homeowners. And then for the first time this year, we also surveyed ISU students. Since they're included in the data, we thought it would be good to get their input as well. And so we did a random sampling of the students at Iowa State and then sent them a survey online. Okay, the identified housing problem in the CHAS data. It shows that the household with the most housing problems, it's 46% over 6,000 are renters and over 21%, 2,000 were owners. And basically the house cost burden greater than 50% of income for the renters was out of that 46, 41.3% had a cost burden greater than 50%. And then for the owner, they had a cost burden greater than 68% out of the 21%. And then the cost burden greater than 30%, but less than the 50, 42% of the 46% were renters and 29.7% were for the owners out of the 21%. So we kind of focus on the cost burden because the other standards above housing, plumbing, all of those things some of that data is not even really what we need to look at anymore, but lack of plumbing facilities, we really don't know what that means. That's just been in the census for a very, very long time. So we just wanted to point out about the cost burden for the renters and owners in the CHAS data. Also, the cost burden for rental payments. And again, we looked at the CHAS data, and it's saying that the majority, 60% of the rental units in Ames between $500,000 and $999,000, and 7% rent for less than $500,000, and 34% was more than $1,000 in 2017. And the monthly increase by 30% this increased by 36% from 2012 to 2018. And in dollars, that was $651 in 2012 to $887 in 2017 for a 2-bedroom, just to kind of give you some rental cost data.
Is that averaged across all the types of rentals, or is it all for 2 bedrooms, or?
This was just for 2 bedrooms.
All for 2 bedrooms, okay.
And
Sorry, on that previous slide, those percentages, I'm trying to understand. That 66 and 34 and 7, shouldn't they all, am I missing something? Shouldn't those all add up to 100%?
I'm sorry, I didn't-
Well, isn't that more than 100%?
Yes.
66 and 34 and 7. I'm just curious. Yeah, I just was curious where the difference came from.
The majority of the women members in Ames between 509, 7%.
Seven.
It's not a big deal. I'm sure it's
I don't think that's-
pretty even in there.
Isn't that because the 34% is part of the 66%?
Yes.
Oh, I see. I thought
Yeah.
the 66 was between the
Yeah.
500 and the 999.
Okay.
No,
Yeah.
no.
Is that what it says?
But it says it's between
It
this.
107%.
That's what it looks
You're
like to
right.
me too. I just was curious.
Yeah.
That's
Anyway, it doesn't matter. You can move on. Yeah. I'm
duly
sorry.
noted. Probably just check your slide, that's all.
We can,
I could check that.
okay, thank you. Okay, cost burden for rental payments. We're looking at the cost burden from 0 to 30%, and then greater, 30% to 50%, and then 50 to 80, and 80 to 100, and then above 100, of which we do not serve under our CDBG or home program, is 80% or less. And so for the city of Ames, it was saying that for that 30% of the households that for the city of Ames, there's 1,085 that fall in the 0 to 30%, which is about 63%. And between the 30 and 50 is 360, and between the 50 and 80 is 195, and between the 80 and 100 is 65, and 100 and above is 69. And then we kind of compared that with the numbers from Story County. As you look in the data that'll come out with the consolidated plan, it also compares to our city, but tonight we just showed a comparison with how the numbers look compared to Story County. And that, again, is units affordable to the 30% households as well, only. Okay, owning a home, based on the 2011-15 data, housing cost burdens for primary housing problems for homeowners in Ames of the total homeowner population. Again, 30%, 405 owners have cost burdens greater than 30%, but less than equal to 50% of their income. And then 68% have housing costs greater than 50% of their income. And so this is a survey that's in the CHAS data.
Vanessa, could you clarify, when we say housing costs, is that principal, interest,
Taxes and insurance.
PI?
It also, yeah, PITI, private mortgage insurance, and then if they have to pay any housing association fees and so forth.
So it's just sort of striking, and I don't want to dwell on this, but it's not supposed to be that way. So when a lender makes a loan, there's a rule of thumb that typically they're not going to loan money so that your housing payment is more than a third. It's sort of a rule of thumb. There are some exceptions, but that's a striking number, and I that may be something to follow up on to sort of tease that out.
Yeah, and I think this is after they've gotten through the mortgage process, and then they report that information, that things change after they become a homeowner rather than at the point that they get a mortgage loan.
Okay, thanks.
Okay, and we also looked at the cost burden for purchasing a home, and we looked at a family size of 3 at the 80% of the Ames metropolitan statistical area income limits of 57,500, and we looked at if they had kind of a lowest credit score, that less than 700, their affordability could be around the 130 range, and if they had a higher credit score over 700, they could possibly qualify between 150 and 180. And then we compared that to the average home sale prices in Ames for the first quarter 1 through 3. The sales was 250, 375. For quarter 4 of 2018, it went up to 255, 103. And then for the first quarter of 2019, sale prices are at 223, 121, which is still greater than what the average family could afford at that 57,500 income level. So just showing you again what the market is for purchasing a home. We did not survey first-time home buyers because we can't pick them out of the general renter population, but we did want you to see what the cost burden is compared to what they can afford and what's available on the market.
Vanessa, one more. So this is where the role of the students in the pool, I think, makes a difference. And I wonder if it's skewing this a bit. Because if you have students in there who are going to be in a season of life where they're not going to have their post-education income, that's going to pull down the purchasing ability if you're looking at affordability of housing for families size of 3. I think that's going to skew things a bit, don't you?
It possibly, because this is just based on the HUD income limit for a family size of 3.
Yeah, so I'm finding myself places where having the students involved makes a lot of sense. And there are some places where I feel like it's the role of the students is skewing this a bit. So it's just something to think about as we go through here.
The role of the students isn't in the HUD number for family size. That's just the income maximum a family can qualify to receive down payment assistance
Right.
from HUD. That's HUD's maximum income limit for a family size of 3 for any other programs that we do, not necessarily if they're students or not. That's the maximum income a family size of 3 can have.
Okay, thank you.
One other quick question. Do you know, are these average prices, are they means or median prices?
Median,
Thank you.
median
Median.
prices,
Thank you.
sorry. Okay, availability burden, and this is a housing gap. Again, this data source came from the CHAS data, and it just talks about the household income, the total units affordable for renters, and what that gap is, and the total units affordable for homeowners and what that gap is. So for example, for a household that has income at 50% or less, the total affordable units is about 6,475. And for renters, it's about 2,755 right now, which leaves a gap of about 3,700 units. And again, this includes students, except for dormitories. So that's why I wanted to make that clarification. And then for homeowners, for that same price range, there's like 1,300 units, affordable units, and then the total number of households is 445, so the gap is like 905 for availability of housing and for those people in those affordability ranges. Again, this is the data source from HUD, and that's what's out there for what they give us to look at. We also looked at the housing problem by census tract, and you notice in census tract 5, the cost burden is 60%. Well, that census tract is the Shaletta Village, all the university housing units, so that's why that number is extremely higher than the other ones. Census tract 7 is right next to that, this campus area. And then census tract 11, again, is West Ames. And as you notice, census tract 1301, that's our NRSA area, that is at 52%. And so that's where we have concentrated, and that's where we got permission from HUD to create an NRSA area. And then overall for Ames, you can see it compared to those census tracts, and then the total number of households in those census tracts. Again, we're just taking that same information and letting you see where those census tracts are on a map. And so that's kind of the information that we put together, again, from the ACS and the CHAS data. Again, we did cut out a lot of slides, but a lot of the information will be in the full report. But we just keeping down to some highlights of where the information seemed to be consistent about the CHAS data versus the impediment study. So right now we're going to get into the impediment study and the choice survey that we did. And again, we surveyed the housing producer, provider, and we compared to this year. We specifically did a lot more online surveys because trying to get people to come to an actual physical group setting, we wasn't getting a lot of participation, so we went to a lot of online surveys this year. And so we did that same thing for 2014 and 2009. Also for the general renters, we also did an online survey. And then for the subsidized housing renters, we mailed them directly their surveys. And then for elderly persons, we did focus groups in 2014. And we actually went out to a lot of the elderly complexes this year and met with the elderly renters. And then current homeowners, we did both online surveys. And then ISR students, for the first time this year, we included them on the online random survey. And then we did do the one public forum and then the one elderly group focus groups for discussion. And then from that, in 2014, we got 34 completed for a 22% response rate. This year, we had a lot more responses, a little bit from that producer, provider group, realtors, managers, developers, lenders, and housing providers. We didn't get a response rate. Well, we got 4, but it didn't end up being a percent. And so then as far as general renters, we got a 12% response rate in 14, and then a 2% response rate this year. Subsidized housing renters, we got 37 in 2014 and 35 this year. The homeowner, we had a big response rate in 14, and that went down to 4 in 2019. And then for the ISU students, we had a 35% response rate. So it just kind of varies year to year as who fills out stuff. There was a lot of surveys going out this year and a lot of people asking for that information from the citizens, especially when we were doing the land use policy comprehensive plan. A lot of that was going on at the same time that may or may not affected people's response rate, but we try to make it very easy that you just go right to a website and fill out a questionnaire.
So Vanessa, and maybe there's a question for Nora, whichever one. So do we have statistically significant data to work with?
On the IUC students, yes. We have 352 who responded out of the 1,000 surveys that they ended up. And we only need 350 to be statistically significant on that one and a 5% confidence level. So for the rest, for the producers, we don't have much, but if the way I do it is that instead of analyzing it individually, we could just probably analyze it by producers and then the general renters. Or else if you do it one by one, it just won't represent all of them.
So I don't have the horsepower to go too far in the weeds on this, but I just want to make sure that as we think about policies that we enter into based upon the data, I will need help thinking about what data we have statistically significant results for and those that we have to rely on other statistical. I mean, there are other ways of developing data if we don't have statistically significant data, and you'll help us do that. But that's an important thing that we need to be tracking with.
Yeah, that's why I have the response rate for each one of them. And then I'm going to discuss in terms of the significance level.
Okay, I'm ahead of you. Thank you.
Okay, and so we also had this is again, people filling out the survey. So housing barriers as perceived by homeowners. And of course, their number one barrier, they said, was the cost of housing. And then it went down from there as far as utilities, filling out a complaint. Of course, excessive application fees didn't really apply to them unless the lenders were charging them an application fee at closing, and then down payment and so forth. So this was really the response that we got from the homeowners as what they perceived as housing barriers are. And these were the housing barriers perceived by renters. And this is the ISU student in green, the subsidized renter in red, and then the general renter in blue. And again, the housing cost burden seemed to be most significant. And then the lack of available decent rental and affordable price ranges was number 2. And then deposits and then attitudes of landlords and so forth, it went down from there.
These are percentages?
Yes.
These are the average value on a
Right.
scale of 1 to 5.
Oh, okay.
1 being strongly disagree to 5 strongly
Oh,
agree.
I see. Thank you.
And then housing barriers perceived by housing providers. And as you can see, that went to job status and then knowledge on how to file a housing complaint. And then And that was more by their, both board, by the realtor and the rental manager, those top two, and then attitudes of landlords, and then the lack of public transportation. And so, again, on the scale, this is how the housing providers responded to the barrier question.
You'll notice here that in this graph, I didn't include the developer, lender, and housing service providers because our N is just too small.
And then we kind of looked at the barriers that came out in our 2014 impediment study versus to 2019. And then cost of housing back in 2014 for the renter was number one, and 19. And then for the subsidized renter, it was the cost of housing ranked second for this year and in 2014. And then for the student, it was, of course, 2019 housing cost. And then perceived by the homeowner was first in 2019. And then the lack of available decent rental units and affordable price ranges for the renter that ranked second in 2019. It didn't rank at all back in 2014. And then for the subsidized renter, it ranked first in both years. And then for the elderly renter, it ranked first this year. And then for the US student, it ranked first this year. And then it didn't rank at all for homeowners. And then excessive deposit, it ranked third in 2019. It didn't rank at all for the general renter or for the subsidized renter or elderly students or homeowners. And see, it goes on from down there. Housing complaints versus negative attitudes and excessive application fees. So again, this is the perception survey for those who responded to the impediments questionnaire.
And the criteria that was used for that is the mean value and also the percentage distribution by whether they agree to that one. So I have two criteria for that.
Okay, and that's kind of the conclusion from both the ACS and CHAS data and all the other sources that we use and the information that we received from the impediment study. And so from there, we did the data analysis and drew the conclusion that based on all of the data, the top two housing burdens, again, was the cost of housing for both renters and homeowners. And this was, of course, the reverse ranking from 2014. And then for ISU students, cost of housing was number one for this year, since this was the first time we surveyed them. And then the second was the availability of affordable housing. Even though our number of units have gone up over the years, it's still ranked as being available for affordability for the general renter, ranked second, and the cost of housing remained first for subsidized housing renters. And then for students, it ranks second because there's a lot more student housing than it was before. So that's kind of the conclusion that we drew from the data that we were looking at. And we also, in the impediment study, we also asked this question of the homeowner, the renter, the subsidized renter, and the students, just what was important in renting or purchasing a home. And the overall agreement was the cost of housing was their top important factor. And so that is the presentation part of the data that was collected to date.
I just found the corrected data that on the slide. It's, I'm looking at the final report that we did. It's 59% of the rental units in Ames rent between 500 and 999.
Gotcha.
7 for less than 500 and 34 for 1,000 in 2017.
Okay.
So we-
So
Thank you.
it's just a typo.
Yeah, thank you.
Sorry.
Perfect. No, that's fine.
Good catch.
Okay, and from there, then we submitted a council action form because we wanted to make sure you saw the data. And so we're proposing the 2019-23 Community Development Block Grant Consolidated Plan goals and priorities, and also the 2019 Action Plan projects. And again, this is a requirement of HUD every 5 years, and this plan is typically due in May, but we had asked a long time ago for an extension, and so it has to be submitted to HUD on and before August 15th. That is our statutory deadline, and so we're now preparing it to go out for a 30-day comment period here the first part of July. And again, we talked about the process with the public forum that began with council in December, and the overview and the information that we received from the participants. That's your attachment A through C. As you facilitated those discussions, we outlined those in your council action form and laid those out. And then kind of did a narration of what those comments were. It was like the need for more affordable housing, both rental and home ownership, and the need to increase the supply of affordable housing seemed to continue to surface as the theme, which matches the data that we've been looking at as well. And so that's when we begin the next steps of actually looking at the data. And that's what we've been doing for the last couple of months. And so showing you the two top barriers that we just discussed, we are offering for your consideration that the goals and priorities for the 2023, be goals and priorities to address low and moderate income residents in the community. Remember, you have to address two things. You have to address how you're going to help low and moderate income residents and how you're going to address non-low and moderate income residents. So there's always two goals and priorities that you have to address as part of the consolidated plan. And we just said utilize and leverage CDBG and home funds through public, nonprofit, and private partnerships to create, sustain, and expand affordable housing for low and moderate income households through increasing the supply of single-family or two-family housing for home ownership in our neighborhood revitalization area, and reduce the cost burden for low-income households to access or maintain rental housing citywide, and to increase the affordability, quality, and availability of owner housing for homeowners citywide. That would be a suggested. Now, if you look back on our priority goals since 2004, they all center around this same thing. It hasn't really changed because we haven't really been able to get ahead of it. So it's still a work in progress for the city. It just kind of shifts as to what we can do with the funding that we receive. Also, for addressing non-low income residents, we just said continue to utilize and leverage CDBG funds through the same partnership with nonprofit, public, and private, sustaining it by integrating affordable and market rate residential developments, removing blight and deteriorated housing to reuse into new housing, support and address code enforcement of deteriorated housing, remove blight and deteriorated housing in floodplains and other hazardous areas. And then just to remind you, for that, for our CDBG funds, we still have to spend 70% of our funds for low and moderate income households over a 3-year period. That is not the case for home. So home is our newest program, and its regulations are a little bit more challenging than CDBG. And so when you mix the two together, you really have to pay attention to what the regulations are. But we feel that these are simplified goals that can be easily understood, but broad enough to allow flexibility to create and implement programs during the 5-year period. As you know, you can change your action plan every year. You get an opportunity to switch what projects you want. You can also change your consolidated plan priorities and goals. You just have to go back out and do a public comment and say, hey, we think we need to shift our priorities and goals. So it's not like it's set in stone for 5 years. You do have flexibility of changing both documents. You just have to go through more publication requirements, as HUD stated. So as far as what we're suggesting for this year's action plan coming up, we're suggesting that we use both CDBG and home funds to complete the 21 State Avenue subdivision, which would include infrastructure and new home construction. Now that we have home funds, we're able to hopefully complete that subdivision, and then utilize our CDBG funds to acquire, demolish, rehabilitate, deteriorate housing citywide. Again, the goal would be to convert single rentals back into home ownership, to sell, to transfer lots or nonprofit organizations, or to provide houses for rent or to purchase. Again, pretty general stuff we've been trying to do, but again, we haven't got ahead of that need. So, and that is what we're recommending for staff, and this is what we would have go out for public comment for the 30-day comment period. And again, just reminding you, these can be changed.
All right. Questions for Vanessa or Nora?
I just have one question about the activity two, the one you were just talking about, where it says utilize CDBG funds to acquire, demolish, or rehabilitate, and then it says to sell or transfer these lots to nonprofit organizations and so on. Does that mean that in each one of those cases, our intent is to transfer it to a nonprofit, or is that just an option for each
That's
one
just
of those?
always an option.
Okay, thank you.
Some we buy at price ranges that may not be affordable for a nonprofit to use, but we can turn around and sell it to a first-time home buyer through our program and then have a bigger return rate that goes back into our pool.
Good, thanks.
I have a question. So a few times in the presentation, it mentioned accessibility and that being an issue for many residents. What is the city doing in particular, if anything, for those with needs in their housing, like accessibility needs? And is there anything that's being expanded upon with this?
The only program that we could do accessibility for would be our CDBG housing rehab program, where we, in the past, we've put in handicap ramps and we've helped people move their laundry from the basement to the second floor. We put in energy efficient uses for them. But as far as rentals, since we don't own rentals, we don't normally do any type of accessibility for rental housing. But we can do it for home ownership.
Gotcha. Okay, thank you.
Good question.
Other questions?
So some of the data that we had tonight compared this last reporting period with a couple years prior. So we have a little bit of longitudinal data, but we don't have anything in the way of comparison between Ames and, for example, in Iowa City that's going to have a similar university population. But it would also be helpful to compare our data with a community that doesn't have our population of students like a Waukee or an Ankeny that we oftentimes compare ourselves to from a standpoint of demographics. I don't have anything to offer in terms of recommendations for changing the ultimate policy recommendations, but for some of those numbers, they're a little disconcerting. And there's a lot for us to sort of take in and process. Yeah, our data available from other communities that would help us to be able to compare so that we're not looking at our data in isolation?
In the survey, we did compare it with Iowa City.
Yeah, we have a housing gap data for Iowa City and Story County. On the final report, we have that comparison, but it's more on the housing gap. And let's see.
And we could certainly look at other communities as well and put that in the data. You want to look at just the college cities, like we deal a lot, we have some of the same issues and conversations with like Waterloo and Cedar Falls, because those are other entitlement communities. They have the same funding that we have. So we ought to talk about how they address certain issues. Because when you compare to a non-entitlement city, they don't have the funds that always do the same kind of programming.
So I think there's value in comparing ourselves both to communities that have large student populations. I think that's going to give you some more apples to apples comparison. But I feel like I'm channeling Peter Rosum tonight. Sorry about that. I can't tell any good Peter Rosum jokes, but I feel like I'm channeling his concerns that sometimes the way we use data in Ames that pulls in student numbers perhaps distorts some of the numbers. And so if we could compare ourselves to other communities that don't have that same level of student population, that might yield some interesting comparisons as well.
How would that affect the action plan activities, though?
I don't think it would. That's why I qualified this. I like the plans. They're general enough to give us some flexibility. So as opportunities arise, you can find a place to hang those within those sort of general goals. But as we think about the challenges our residents face in housing, some of those numbers are disconcerting. And I'm trying to wrap my brain around to what degree the student population plays a role in that. So that's not something we have to do in this process, but maybe we could get later on.
Yeah, we
Just-
both talked about how to just separate out families, and it's nowhere in the data. But we also need to make sure people understand that students are in the data. And so that does skew the need and the gap and all of that. So a lot of people think that number is only for families, and it's not. And it's hard to do that unless we do our own self-survey of families of, again, how do you abstract some students because there are student families. So we haven't worked through that, so Nora.
The things that we have in here comparing Ames with other communities is the units affordable to 30% of income level, which is extremely low income. And we are comparing City of Ames with Story County and Iowa City. And the things we look at are the total rental households and the extremely low income renter households, affordable units, and what came up is the housing gap. So we're comparing the housing gap between City of Ames, Story County, and Iowa City. And that is only for the very extremely low income people. Another thing that we have in there is in terms of the vacancy and the occupied units for the 30%. It says like how many units are being occupied by the 30% and how many units that should be for the 30% households are being occupied by other income levels. And we have that for those three, Ames, Story County, and Iowa City. So unless you have a good idea of what city we need to compare it with, maybe we could get it from CHAS data.
So we know we're never going to be able to compete housing costs with some of the smaller communities in the area. So that's sort of an unrealistic expectation. COLA will always have less expensive housing here.
Mhm.
And so if you're looking for less expensive rental or owner-occupied property, it's available, but you'll have to drive a little bit
Yes.
away. And I don't know that we're ever going to change that in a measurable way, but I just think some of this data is helpful to contextualize. Thanks for fielding those questions.
And there was a slide that we had that showed how many of the higher income units were being occupied that lower income people can't get because they were being occupied by people with higher income levels. So it's interesting what the data is. It's also kind of interesting that the data is always behind where we are.
Oh, yeah.
And so people have a tendency to say, well, that's not the way. Well, we understand that, but we can only go what we have that's in the database, and it's always going to be behind. And that's why the income population has already changed, and we're still looking at 2017 data. But that's what HUD has us do because that's the most current, complete data that covers all spectrums of the information that we're trying to gather.
I have one other question. Sorry, I didn't bring it up earlier, but I think you might be able to address this a little bit. In my discussions I've had with some students, I've heard that there are some health hazards, and I saw that there were a few issues where people were complaining about their lack of knowledge when it comes to making complaints, as well as attitudes of landlords in particular. But when it comes to health hazards like mold or vermin, a lot of people like those aren't necessarily regulated as well, and so landlords aren't required to get rid of those. Is that something that the city has impact in? Because I've had previous discussions with city staff that said yes, that is something that is impactable by the city, and the fact that it isn't deemed a health hazard necessarily is the reason why it's not enforceable. Would you know anything to do with that, or have you heard of any complaints with mold in particular?
I think that's probably a question we'd pose to the next staff.
Sounds good.
Yeah, I would leave that to our building official.
Yeah.
That's her area of expertise more so than mine, so I wouldn't want to overstate or understate anything.
Thank you.
Vanessa, on your slide, can you go to slide 14 just for a second? It looks like we have a lot of renters that have some challenges in terms of, affordability as well too. Is that correct? So in the council goals that we're going to vote on here in just a few, or they're going to vote on in a few seconds, the first goal was just about using home and CDBG for, I think, constructing
Single-family.
new 321 state, which is building new homes. And then I think as an option in goal 2 for some rentals was there any thought given to building new rentals or subsidized rentals? Or is that not an option, or would that goal fit underneath the second goal that you have in the staff report?
And you can use your home funds to build rental housing.
For rental housing too?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so the question is that, in your staff report, you have item 2, utilize CDBG to acquire, demolish. Could that be utilize CDBG and home to acquire and demolish? Because that's where the rentals fall into play. I just want to make sure we have enough latitude to meet the variety of needs that you've identified in all your data acquisition and analysis.
Yes, you can add for renters as well in there for the number 3 bullet. Is that what you're talking about?
It's the number
Under-
2, isn't it?
I was looking at on the staff report, you have 2019-2020 annual action plan activities. I think it's page 1, 2, 3.
Yes, increase the affordability, quality, availability of owner housing for homeowners citywide. Is that the one you're talking about? No?
Um,
I'm sorry.
Page 3, my page 3 at least. You have 2019-2020 annual
You're talking
action.
about the action plan. I'm sorry, I was looking at the priority goals. I
I'm sorry.
apologize.
You have two
Yes.
activities.
Mhm.
I was just curious if, so that your department as well as council has more flexibility, do you want to put in utilize CDBG and home to acquire, demolish? Because you have rental in that one, or
Sure.
would it be a third goal, utilize CDBG and home to consider new rental? Because we're not saying we're definitely going to do it. It's just more or less giving the council, you're adopting a plan so you can have that opportunity to meet those needs you've identified.
Right, and I think that's certainly something we can consider. And I think why I use CDBG, because on the rules of CDBG, sometimes it's easier to do those things than it is to do home.
Okay.
And then sometimes it's easier, you can do both of them together. So yes, adding a third one could work as well. That's fine.
Or you could just use home funds for your first one and use all CDBG for your rental one, I guess.
Yeah, but I think home is more geared toward rental than CDBG is.
Okay.
So.
I just want to
but
make
we
sure
can-
you had the
We can certainly
flexibility.
add rental and we can certainly add home, and we would just carve out those particular detail activities at the time. This is just, again, a general, enough that it gives you
Right.
flexibility to do that. But I think adding those terms would give you even more flexibility.
Okay, thank you. Any other questions for Nora or Vanessa before council makes decision here? All right, so there's 3 alternatives that included in the council action form.
And
any
can you
other-
make sure you add the language for number 2 as part of your?
Yep.
Thank you.
Are you ready for a motion? All right.
I'm happy to move
All right,
on the
David.
basis of your recent comment here. I think alternative 2 is the one that says modify this slightly and then approve. I like the way it's written, except I think that it does give more flexibility if on action plan activity 2, we said utilize CDBG and or home funding,
Mhm.
but the rest being the same.
Yeah.
So my motion would be to,
Did you
Make that
want to
change
add
in-
rental? Did you want to add rental to that?
rental is already in action item 2 for renter purpose, or renter purchase.
No, that's just converting single rentals back into home ownership,
Oh, I see.
not to create rental units.
Okay, is there a second, or you want to let it die for a second and get it wordsmithed a little differently?
Yeah.
Oh, to rent or purchase. I'm sorry, you're right.
So it seems okay to you?
Yep.
Second.
All right, moves to second then. So let's go ahead and vote on the motion to amend item 2, and then we'll go ahead and adopt the plan. Any discussion? So the motion is to add, after utilize CDBG and/or home funds. Those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carried. Okay, entertain a motion to adopt the 2019-2020 Annual Action Plan activities.
So
I'm sorry. Alternative 1 as amended. I apologize. There's more than that. There's goals, priorities. There's a whole motion there.
So moved.
Second.
All right, as amended. All right, those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carried. Anything else?
Thank you again. And again, we're a little bit behind the 8 ball, but we apologize to our community for that. And we know they're always out here to support us. And hopefully they will have an opportunity to go through the public hearing.
Very good.
Thank
Thank you
you.
for your work.
Thank you.
Thank you, Nora.
Thank you.
All right, move on to item number 3, rental housing regulations. And while staff is coming up to get set up to begin their presentation, if people are interested, we will allow public input tonight. If you're interested in making public input, there are orange cards out in the lobby. Would you please make sure you fill one out? And then bring that up when you come tonight to speak. Hi, Sarah. Okay, I'd like to review what we're going to be doing tonight. And the purpose tonight is to evaluate specific aspects of the rental housing regulations. This is not a whole-scale review of the entire ordinance or regulations. It's very specific. And so what we're going to do is we're going to take no more than 30 minutes for staff presentation and initial council questions. After that, we'll open up public input, and it'll be limited to 40 minutes total. And any speaker will be allowed to have up to 3 minutes to address council. After that, council will follow up with discussion and questions for staff, which will allow no more than 40 minutes. And then if council decides they want to move forward to any item, we'll allow 25 minutes. And then we are going to adjourn no later than 9 o'clock this evening. We know this could take a lot longer if we wanted to, but I think we can keep on task and accomplish our objectives. So we'll go ahead and let Sarah and Mark start with presentation, and then council can ask questions and have initial discussion. Sarah.
Good evening, Mayor and City Council. As you know, you asked us in May to come back with options to enhance the rental code after the recent state changes. So we put together kind of a synopsis of what's happened over the last couple of years and the changes that have been made, the cause that the removal of the rental cap, I guess what the removal of the rental cap has caused and where it has left us now. And then we've listed some of the topics that you've discussed over the last couple years that you entertained. You might have talked about them quite a bit or not a lot at all, but they're topics that came up in your discussions. So we wanted to bring them back up and see if there was interest on any of these for more information. And if you want us to do anything further in regards to the rental code since we've lost the cap.
Do you have a copy of your page 3 and 4 by any chance, hard copy?
Mm-hmm.
I'm wondering for the sake of audience members who may not have seen it, Sarah, if you wouldn't mind just highlighting the 4 categories and maybe just touching on the bullet points. So as excuse me, as council goes through and asks questions, people are aware of that as well, too. And for the sake of repeating, if you want to just kind of go through those, just highlight them real quickly, and then we can go ahead and we'll start discussion then.
Sure. So the quality of life, health, and safety, this has a lot to do with the nuisance issues that we've discussed as a result of rental properties, garbage, parking, junk vehicles. Are there things we can hold the landlords more accountable for? That's the first bullet. Suspending LOCs, having a tiered fee system, or maybe even an incentive instead of a repercussion to get a longer letter of compliance. The second bullet is maybe potentially requiring a local agent, so local property manager, so we don't have absentee landlords. We could also make an LOC not transferable either after repeated violations or just in general. That's a couple bullets down. Rent abatement was something that came up, and that is already in the state code. If we adopt it, Iowa City has adopted it in the last year, and it allows essentially tenants to not have to pay rent if their landlord isn't in compliance with life safety issues or they're not a registered rental, let's say. We could let the tenant know that they wouldn't need to pay rent at that time. Prohibit or restrict off-street parking. We could also prohibit what they do to the property. We had a lot of discussion about, could they enclose a porch? Could they add on? What kinds of things could they do? Is it adding bedrooms or just adding to the footprint of the house? Do we care? And then the last bullet is to make illegal rentals ineligible. So if we find that somebody is operating a rental illegally, they wouldn't be eligible for a letter of compliance. The next topic is reducing the intensity. So that's really where the cap came in. Some other options is to establish a distance between rentals. Instead of a cap in a neighborhood, we would say you can only have so many within so many feet of each other. We could prohibit owner-occupied rentals. So this is also something Iowa City has done where they don't allow anyone to register a property if it's not a bona fide. We created bona fide rental definition over the last couple of years. If it's not a bona fide rental, they wouldn't allow it to be registered. And then we could also increase the code requirements for new rentals. We could make it essentially harder or more costly to create a rental property. And then, perfect. Did I miss a page? No. Okay. Yeah, that's right. Okay, so incentivizing conversion of rentals to owner-occupied properties. So that was in, I believe, planning is coming back with a report on that at some point, how we might be able to provide financial incentive to convert back to rental properties. Should have sat over there. And then occupancy limitations. So we adopted, that's what started all of this, and we adopted a new occupancy ordinance. The changes to the cap may change your mind on how effective our occupancy ordinance is. So these are other items that we talked about when we created that, tying it to parking, the number of off-street parking spaces, limiting occupancy to a certain number based on the square footage. We even said at one point limiting occupancy to a certain number of students. We can prohibit them from adding bedrooms. We froze the number of bedrooms counted in certain areas if they're registered rental properties now. So this recommendation here would be to freeze all properties so that properties that are not currently rentals would be stuck with the number of bedrooms that they have currently, instead of registering it and then adding to that. We could prohibit them from expanding the footprint of the dwelling. We could remove the roomer exception. If you recall, that's what allows an owner-occupied property to have a roomer. So a parent can buy a property for a student. The student can have one friend live with them, and it's not required to be a rental. If we remove that exception, we would be subjecting them to the rental code. And then another option would be to change the definition of bedrooms so that it more accurately reflects the assessor's definition. We vary on just a couple things, but we found that they can be quite significant. So the assessor requires a closet. They don't measure ceiling height. We measure ceiling height, but don't require a closet. So it really does make a difference in how we count the number of bedrooms.
Thank you. All right, initial questions for Sarah or Mark?
Mark, can you remind us about the legal decision regarding, I believe it had to do with the expansion or intensification of rooms in a home? I can't recall the specifics, which is why I'm asking you. And how that fits with any of these things that are suggested here.
You mean something the legislature did?
No, it was the legal, yeah,
304.
the
Oh,
Knapp Street decision.
okay.
So it was, if it's a non-conforming structure now, it basically determined that adding bedrooms increased the intensity.
Mm-hmm.
So previously, we would have said if it had 3 bedrooms now, but you didn't add square footage and you've created 4 bedrooms, you wouldn't be. That rule overturned that. So adding bedrooms, and I think we even changed the zoning code now to reflect that. So
Yeah.
adding bedrooms increases the intensity of a non-conforming use.
Yeah, and so that's, we changed our ordinance in response to that court decision. So it's not, and sorry, it took me a second to remember which court decision you were talking about, but we changed the ordinance to address that issue. So the court decision doesn't really affect us at this point because we have a new ordinance.
So that doesn't have any impact on the, for example, no enclosing of porches to create bedrooms or any
no.
of that? Okay.
Other questions?
Yeah, so question I had earlier that wasn't at the right time. Now I think it is. So when it comes to mold on properties, is that something that the city can do something about in relation to regulating and making it so if it is complained, it would be the landlord's responsibility in dealing with that? It wouldn't make much sense for a person to deal with that because they can't really tear down walls in their own rental, and there's lots of other reasons and health and safety violations that I feel that that mold constitutes.
So we do have a tenant complaint process in place where if a tenant is having troubles with their landlord, getting compliance, getting something remedied, they can file a complaint with us and we will mediate, if you will, between the landlord and the tenant to make sure that the property is maintained in compliance with the rental code. The rental code doesn't specifically call out mold, but it does say that the unit needs to be maintained in a clean and sanitary manner. So we can fall back to that. It's typically our goal is to find out where the mold is coming from. So if it's a structural issue, it's something that the landlord needs to take care of and get fixed so that mold doesn't keep recurring. Sometimes it's as simple as not using the vent fan when they're showering, and it is a result of the lifestyle of the people there. Also, we're in Iowa and basements get wet, and so sometimes just a dehumidifier helps alleviate the issue. So we have a lot of options for it, and we're happy to mediate those. There is a tenant complaint process in place.
Just to make clear, you said mediate. They wouldn't know if they could file charges against somebody who doesn't affix the mold.
What's that?
You have the tools that can go after a property owner who doesn't correct the mold situation. Not
Correct.
mediate, because what if you can't,
Nope,
both parties don't agree?
We essentially facilitate a conversation between the two, and if they're not in compliance with the rental code, then we can issue a citation.
So the existence of mold and the lack of correction, you can take action against the property owner.
Correct. Mhm.
So when I first did reporting on this early last year, I talked to some people from the city who had mentioned that the complaint process happens sometimes, but there's still situations where mold can't be solved in a unit. Are you aware of like what that type of situation would be? If there's are situations where it ends up not becoming the landlord's responsibility?
It should always, I mean, there's always some cause of it. So we would find the root cause of it. And if it's structural, if there's water getting into the structure, it would be the landlord's responsibility to fix that. And we would make sure that they do.
Okay. What of, let's say, vermin? If there's a bat problem or a health cause that is due to cockroaches, rats, or something of the like, is that also something that is a deemable health hazard?
Yep, we have very specific code language in Chapter 13 for extermination. And it spells out when it's the occupant's responsibility and when it's the landlord's responsibility to resolve the issue. So if you're living in a manner that's dirty, you're producing a lot of garbage, and you're creating the cockroaches, it's
Right.
your responsibility to get rid of them. If you're in a multifamily unit and they're in the common areas or they're there when you move in, then the code says that it's the landlord's responsibility.
Would there be any way that it could be clear within the code so it wouldn't have to go to mediation, sort of just like if we were to specifically mention mold, for example, would that make the process of mediation almost obsolete in that sense, because it would be very cut and dry whose responsibility dealing with that would be, or is that something that just wouldn't really help at all?
I think it wouldn't harm anything to add it in there, but I think we have the tools now to address it when we need to.
Okay, thank you.
Other questions for Sarah or Mark?
I do have a question about unifying the assessor's counting of bedrooms and ours. And you pointed that there are a couple of areas where it differs, but it seems like in an ideal world, we would agree on what the definition is. And so even though there are differences, do you see it being a difficult transition? Is it like going to really affect a lot of people in a way that's just going to change their calculus? And that's what makes it difficult?
I think it could affect a lot of people. Another big one is that they look for an egress window of an egress window size. They don't measure anything. So if it looks like someone can get out, it's fine. If we started enforcing that, we would potentially be making people change out a lot of egress windows.
So it is difficult, it sounds.
And ceiling height is really hard also. When they don't count it, but we do. So on the assessor's site, they might say that there's 3 bedrooms because they don't care that it's a 6'2" ceiling in the attic. And the rental code does say that's too short. We can't approve it as a bedroom.
Okay, thanks.
So if we look at these options, some of them are in the category of what I might call low-hanging fruit. That is more of the enforcement type of things. What we heard through the long deliberation we went through as a city over the rental housing cap from our realtor friends is they said, don't put in the cap, just focus on enforcement. Okay, well, we've got tools and maybe we should really drill down on some enforcement issues. But there are some other options that you've provided us that are moving closer in spirit towards the rental housing cap that the legislature made very clear they didn't want to see. And I would like, maybe John, I don't know if you want to speak to this, or Mark or Sarah, but I'd be curious for those of you who spend a lot of time with the legislature, could you help us think through the contours of what are the lessons we should be learning from the legislative session so that we don't find ourselves in what I've called the game of whack-a-mole, that we come up with another ordinance and they say, great, Ames, here you go. There's another one. So I think I'm ready to be done with that, but I'd like to hear from those of you who are in dialogue with the legislators that help us sort of frame the discussion tonight.
Well, it's always hard to say what the legislature thinks because it's 150 people, and the bills come up and they vote on them, and I don't know that there's any general philosophy there. The philosophy, maybe if I had to name one, is people should be able to do with their property what they want to. That's seems to be, that was a lot of the debate on the rental cap issue. So, I think it's just hard to predict which things that we might do, they might, take offense at and try to undo. I think it's, in the case of the rental cap, we had, organized groups, the realtors and others, going to the legislature, asking them for this language that would prohibit us from having a rental cap. So I think if you're doing things that, that the realtors are okay with, or landlords and realtors are okay with, or at least they're not going to object to them, then it's less likely they'll go to the legislature and try to get it overturned. Certainly we had realtor after realtor showing up here telling you that they didn't want to see the rental cap. So I think it's not surprising they went to the legislature then to try to overturn what we'd done. So to the extent you have buy-in from them, I think it's less likely the legislature will do something. But again, it's just really hard to predict, I think, what the legislature is going to do, because it's 150 people, and they have priorities every year, and it's really hard to say what they're thinking.
But for example, one of them would be if we try to create spatial separation.
Yeah.
And say we can only have so many rentals in this geographical area.
Right.
That's starting to feel like a rental cap to me. So I get the fact that we can't read all 150 minds, but I think that's falling closer into that category.
And I agree, it is. I don't think it's a rental cap. They didn't define rental cap when they passed that state law, so it's not a flat-out rental cap. But I can see that people would view it as maybe something pretty similar to that. Ultimately, at some point within the entire city, you get to the point of having a cap, I guess, if you implemented a distance between rentals. But I think we could make an argument that it's not the same as a rental cap. But I certainly understand the position that it's kind of getting close to that.
Well, Tim, and I'm just going to try and summarize what was a lot of conversation. One was the rallying cry was property rights. That was what we heard from the legislators. So I think we have to look at property rights. Now, there's arguments on both sides, because you can also argue for property rights. Well, and why can't I have the right to sell my home to a convenience store? Who wants to put a convenience store somewhere? The point is, it becomes a slippery slope. But that being said, that was a big issue. And I will say that Representative Sexton, as I reported to the council several times, more than 2 or 3 times has said, why can't you pass more ordinances, and why can't you enforce the issues that exist? So to that end, if we look at, can you go back to the first, I'm just going to rifle through these and give you this is my opinion. As Mark said, I'm not going to guarantee anything how the legislature is going, but I would say that you start getting into the quality of life issues, the first bullet, second bullet, third bullet, fourth bullet, 5, 6 for sure, the parking. 7, possibly, that's my little one. And then 8 are potentially, in my opinion, don't look like as much property rights as they are really enforcing. In particular, we talked about parking. And so the representative said point blank, well, why can't you pass ordinances to control parking? Okay, so that I think is on the table. I would concur with Mark. I would concur with you, I think. And I agree with Mark entirely. I think the minimum distance between rentals, that could become difficult, in my opinion, because the point is, you could start working it. So the point is, you're trying to go, do a workaround as well too. Frankly, I had a question for Sarah is on the third bullet. Help us understand why we allow houses to continue the way they are and why they're not required to be brought up to code. For example, if a house, an older home, is now converted to a rental, they don't have to go ahead and put in egress windows in bedrooms. They don't have to bring it up to a current standard. To me, that's a life safety situation. That's not a property right. That's just basically saying, how can we protect the safety for those who are going to rent it, regardless if it's a student or a family or, someone with a young child as well, too. So there's some things that are really kind of, basic that I would seem. So then you go to the next page, the financial incentive. Well, that's a no-brainer from a standpoint if we can do it, not property rights. But then again, you go to what's the intent for the occupancy limitations? And you say limit occupancy based on the number of off-street parking spaces. Well, if parking is an issue, to me, then we look at it as a parking issue, not trying to control occupancy. And I just think, in talking with Iowa City, they have a definition on bedroom size, closet. I can get a definitive definition of what should be a bedroom. And, and there's building code requirements for daylight, for ventilation, for egress, closet, and all those things. And to Devin's point, can you go with a 2-foot wide bedroom door, or do you go to 2'10" to let a wheelchair go through? I don't know. The point is those are the kind of things that council needs to kind of get some direction. And then you start getting the rest of those bullets. I think you have to look at it from a standpoint, would it be interpreted as being a violation of property rights and the ability? But that's kind of, it's a little bit of a dance here. But the point is, I think that's kind of what my take was from the hours and hours and hours of conversations, emails, and dialogue to try and help give council some direction from that standpoint.
Thank you.
Yep.
Yeah, and Tim, I just to follow up on what the mayor said, I think that the establishing a minimum distance between rentals is probably, out of everything on this list, is the thing that's most likely the legislature might react to. So.
I think the other thing too is that when we're talking about, let's say you take an older home and you want to turn it into a rental. It's not just in near campus neighborhoods, it's anywhere in the city. So if you apply that over the entire city, then all of a sudden it's not becoming, quote, discriminatory. It's just we're trying to improve the quality of the housing stock and the safety that exists in that area, and then also gives Sarah and her team some definite format they can go ahead and follow.
I do want to point out, you referred the letter from Scan Neighborhood, remember a few weeks ago? The way we dealt with it, we tried to highlight what their proposal were there. So you're not going to see a separate report on it. That's the way we try to incorporate their thoughts into the alternatives.
Okay, other questions for Mark or Sarah initially before we open up public comment? All right, seeing none, we're going to go ahead and open up public input. We will go from 10 to 7 until 7:30. At 7:30, we will close the public input time. And 3 minutes per speaker. Is there anyone that wants to all open public comment? Is there anyone that wishes to address council on this topic? And I know that my timer noise is annoying, but I want to give as many people as a chance to talk if they want to this evening, up to 7:30. So when the timer goes off, I would ask that you would, you have 5 seconds to wrap your comments up.
We're
That's
tag
it.
teaming.
Thank you very much.
We're tag teaming.
Two separate,
So-
but we kind of go together.
So,
Oh, wait a minute. Who's calling the shots here?
hey,
I'll
so
go behind you.
All right, thank you.
Leslie Kowaller, 2121 Hughes Street. The change in the occupancy ordinance, coupled with the legislature's invalidation of Ames rental cap, leaves our near-campus neighborhood in an untenable position. As staff perfectly stated in its June 18th report, the potential number of renters in a property has increased, but the offsetting action of restricting the number of overall rentals has been eliminated. In other words, our neighborhoods have been dealt a double blow. Near-campus neighborhoods already bear a disproportionate share of the burden caused by an imbalance in the ratio of owner-occupied to rental housing. With the increase in allowable occupancy, which makes purchasing investment property even more profitable, this imbalance will only get worse. Although near-campus neighborhoods can no longer be called concentration cap neighborhoods, we must maintain some sort of special designation as we go forward that acknowledges the unique set of circumstances and challenges that these neighborhoods face. Staff has come up with many excellent proposals that would help our neighborhoods, and I support almost all of them. But due to time constraints, Barbara and I will only address what we feel is the single most important item: the number of renters allowed in a dwelling. This is because there's a direct correlation between higher occupancy and the financial attractiveness of purchasing investment property. Our preference, and by far the simplest fix, would be to return occupancy in new near-campus rental properties to 3 adults, regardless of the number of bedrooms. We know that this may adversely affect families that comprise more than 3 adults. But what you have to understand is that if a property houses 5 unrelated renters, 5 different people are paying the rent. Even if the rent is as low as $400 per bedroom, most families simply cannot afford a monthly rent bill of $2,000. So in reality, they are already priced out of our neighborhoods. If only 3 adults were allowed in that same home, the total rent would only be $1,200, which might open the door of affordable renting housing to more families, which has been a goal of this city for a long time. The 3 adult limit, of course, also makes conversion to rental property near campus less attractive for investors, which is in line with the goal of the former rental cap, which was to stop those conversions altogether. If council chooses not to revisit occupancy, then at the very least, please level the playing field between current rentals that cannot add bedrooms for occupancy purposes and new rentals that can, by expanding the bedroom freeze to all rentals in near-campus neighborhoods. And Barbara will talk a little bit about this further. Thank you.
Thank you. Aaron, did you get Leslie's address? Okay, all right. Barbara?
Barbara Pleasance, 516 Lynn. We want to thank you for your past support for SCAN. I hope that I wouldn't be here once again fighting to preserve our near-campus neighborhoods. As Leslie just discussed, bedroom number for determining occupancy is a crucial issue. She raised the possibility of limiting it to in near-campus neighborhoods to 3 adults, but if you choose not to go in that direction, we suggest another option for our neighborhoods. The current occupancy code is tied to bedroom number. The bedroom number used to determine maximum occupancy in near-campus neighborhoods was frozen as of January 1st, 2018, for all existing rentals. Coupled with an anticipated rental cap, this would help minimize the increase in number of renters. There was no need to be concerned with new rentals since there couldn't be any with a rental cap. In the absence of the cap, new rentals can apply for LOCs after adding bedrooms, and current rental property owners can do the same by giving up their LOCs and re-registering after adding bedrooms. This is unfortunate, and we will certainly see an increased number of 4 and 5 bedroom rental houses. We know of one house in SCAN where owners added basement egress windows in anticipation of applying for an LOC. We have heard of others with similar intent. There was also concern about demolition of houses and replacement with mini dorms, as happened on Storm Street. We suggest that for purposes of determining occupancy in our neighborhoods, bedroom number be frozen for all rentals, current or future, at the number on record as of January 1st, 2018. Any replacement structure should be limited to the number in the demolished one. But there's a problem, which has been noted. The only public record of bedroom number for any new LOC applicant is that of the assessor. This is the new number that would need to be used despite the fact that the city's definition of bedroom differs and in some ways is much less restrictive. In fact, the city definition makes it easier to claim rooms as bedrooms, for example, because no closet is required. This works to the detriment of our attempts to limit occupancy. We suggest that, at least for occupancy determination, bedroom definition in single-family homes should be that of the assessor. There are a number of excellent proposals in the staff report, but the most essential goal is to limit the increase in number of rental properties. Limits on bedrooms and thus on tenant number will help accomplish this. We hope you will put in place a set of policies to mitigate the deleterious effects of the legislature's actions that overturned the rental cap on which you and we all spent so much time and effort. Thank you.
Okay, next. You can give that here to the. And just for the benefit of the clerk here, it'd be helpful to be sure you pronounce your name and your address so she can catch it for the record, please. Thank you.
Nancy Marion, 2226 Jensen Avenue, Ames native. This is very unpracticed. So I just want to say that the number one concern that I've heard for 23 years is affordable housing. This has never gone away, and it seems that it's getting worse. Today, you can't build single-family homes under 275 in Ames. Yet affordable doesn't mean just acquisition of the cost of building. It means utilities, repairs, maintenance. And what you don't want is to have that cost be in building something and then find out 10 years later, yeah, including concrete because it was so cheap. So the point being that we need our older housing stock for rentals. A lot of the new that's coming in is really expensive. And if you enact new rental codes like egress windows above grade, not just egress windows below grade, and I don't know how some of you are using that terminology to be specific on that, or hardwiring smoke detectors, what's going to happen? Rents are going to go up. Creating a new rule that allows owners to remove a rental, then add bedrooms, then bring it back on. If they have to comply with a new code, what's going to happen? The rents are going to go up. When you deny a homeowner the right to rent a room out of their house, their costs and the rental costs for the roomer go up. If you won't allow LOCs to be transferred on a complying property, and I'm referring specifically to all these things in this list here, if you won't allow LOCs to be transferred on a complying property, rents will go up as the new owner has to comply with any change in codes. If you deny, can't read my own writing. If you deny a vacation house, you are pushing short stay costs up. And you may be doing that to special needs guests who can only find what they need in guest housing. If you make an LOC non-transferable due to repeated violations, you're punishing the new for the sins of the old. Prohibiting roomers eliminates us helping families in needs who might lose their job. So if that's a blank slate, then you're not helping a lot of people who might be hurting. When you create rental standards that are so far beyond any regulation of an owner-occupier, you are creating upwards moving rents. Loss of affordable housing, as owners will choose to sell their older properties, leaving a higher cost basis in place for any new owner that wants to come along and try to rent it. All of these things are very effective at doing the opposite of what you say you want. And I'm sorry, I think that's my phone.
That's a timer.
Gosh, okay, so here's my plan.
Your
Keep it
time is
simple.
up, ma'am. Thank you.
I had a plan.
And John, as maybe a reminder to people, they're free to email us as well.
That's right.
So don't feel like the conversation has to end here tonight.
All right, next person.
Ryan Hauk, 65697 190th Street, Nevada. I'm up here today to talk about short-term rentals, Airbnbs, and I don't have any.
Wait, excuse me.
Yes, sir.
We're not talking about short-term rentals tonight.
Okay.
So,
I thought vacation lodging was on number 3.
on number 3,
It was in the staff
It's in the
report.
staff report.
beg your pardon. Go ahead.
Thank you, sir.
I'll start over. Thank you.
No problem.
Go ahead.
So I've been up here several times. I don't have any new data to present as far as what other cities are doing. I've talked about that a lot, especially with other college towns similar to Ames. But what I do have is data as a host. We've been doing this for a little while now. And I know the guests who come in, they're called transient guests on our code, but they have other names. They're moms, their dads, their grandma, grandpas, friends, family. They are coming in to see the people in Ames. During graduation weekend, I looked at the Airbnb website just to see how full or busy it was. Graduation weekend, there's none available. Second day as well. People are coming in for Ames people to use this service. We had another guest that stayed with us. She messaged me and said, "Hey, I just checked into this hotel. It's dirty. I can't stay here with my family. I have celiac disease. I have to cook all my meals." I said, "Hey, we got a kitchen. It's fully stocked. Come on over." She was so excited, so glad that she had this place that she could stay in Ames, visiting her family. Like I said, I've been up here. I think this has gone for about a year and 3/4. And as far as I've been at all these meetings, no one's been up here to talk down on it. We've had so many hosts talking up here saying, we want to do this, we want to do this the right way. No one's been up here. Maybe there'll be there someone tonight. No one's been up here. So I just don't know where any talk against it is coming from. Maybe there's been emails, I don't know. And I'll try to follow up here. Just only because it's been the topic today of low affordable housing. We bought our Airbnb for $105,000. You cannot buy much in Ames for $105,000. We took this not very nice property. We invested into it. We took the entrepreneurial risk of money and wondering what's going to happen here. We've made it into something we're really proud of. And so that is what we did. And I'm just going back to the staff report from last week. Option 1 would be my vote, but if that doesn't work, I know with the rental cap, there was looking for a low level of control. I get that. So I'd propose also to option 3, 4, 5. Very open, just not option 2. Thank you.
Thank you.
Hello, I'm Paul Adama from 229 South Russell Avenue. My main issue is the point about banning owner-occupied rentals. I'm a property owner in a near campus neighborhood. Last school year, I rented out 2 bedrooms to a couple in my 4-bedroom house. This provided needed money for home improvements. In the course of the year, I shingled the entire house. We're in the process of painting. I removed mold and added plumbing for an upstairs bathroom. I tore down a dead tree in the backyard and fixed water problems in the basement. This is only part of the many things that I've done. Without owner-occupied rental, none of these home improvements would have been possible. In addition to this, owner-occupied rentals, I believe, are not the problem. When you have a property that is being rented out with the owner there, you get a certain kind of accountability that you don't get with rentals that don't have that in place. That's all I had to say. Out of everything, I would just say, please do not vote on a ban for owner-occupied rentals. Thank you.
Thank you. Others?
Hello, Paul Livingston, 1926 George Allen Avenue.
Is that large enough, Paul? Is that what you want to see?
Yes, the question was asked, what might be objectionable if the city were to consider some other alternatives? And I'm only speaking for myself. I am a realtor, but I'm not speaking on behalf of realtors. I'm speaking as Paul Livingston. I've had the pleasure and privilege of representing those in areas near campus who wish to sell only to owner-occupied persons. Worked with them on restrictive covenants, as effective or ineffective as they might be. Worked with those who don't care. They want the highest price, the best possible price. I've represented buyers who might be desiring an investment property. I've represented buyers who are looking for a single-family home in those same neighborhoods. So I'm a free market in that sense. I'm about the individual and their rights. As I look at the occupancy limitations that might be proposed up on the screen, I see restrictions. We already have restrictions as to the bedroom size, for example. I don't know the rental code. I'm not in that. I'm not a residential rental specialist, but I think it's 70 square foot is a minimum bedroom size. It's already determined whether you want to make that larger or otherwise. I guess one could determine that. But a number of those proposed restrictions are restrictions on making improvements to the property that would otherwise be legal. As a homeowner, you make an application, building permit, you want to add a bedroom, you want to expand your parking, you want to make a turnaround on your drive. I'm not saying you pave your whole front yard, but there are a number of things on this list that really have a terrible restriction on the individual owner as to how they may use their property, which would otherwise be legal. I think the most offensive of those proposals is limiting occupancy based on the number of students. Now, students is not a protected class. I get that. You probably, that would probably stand. However, I just find that, targeting a certain class of people based on, well, I don't know. Prohibiting rentals from expanding the footprint of the dwelling. Again, I just see that as a basic property right that one could choose to do that, whether they add bedrooms or not. If it's otherwise permissible and I don't know if you're defining neighborhoods here again, but the property rights that are otherwise afforded to myself or someone else to expand on the house to the extent that it's permissible, I think those things could be challenged. I certainly agree that by drawing string lines or distance requirements, that's a cap by another name. It's just a different way about going about a cap to accomplish that. But thank you for the opportunity to have this discussion tonight. I sincerely appreciate it. Thank you.
Hey, everyone. Sarah Conroy, 840 Brookridge Avenue. Just one quick, I guess, concern or caution. Going back to if you could flip the page to the quality. I have concerns about, overall, I am very much in favor of proactively making sure that landlords are good landlords. However, the one concern that I have is the holding a landlord accountable for nuisance issues, in particular noise and things like that generate phone calls to police. And where I have concerns with that fall mostly for like domestic violence victims, people with disabilities, that those sorts of noise complaints happen, but it is illegal for a landlord to punish a tenant for a nuisance complaint in response to a right to assistance type of call. So I would just want us to be very cautious in holding an owner of a property responsible for nuisance issues like that, and any sort of noise because there are situations where it is unfortunate and we would not want a landlord to be retaliating against a tenant. So just be thinking of those sorts of things as you're looking at this stuff.
Thank you.
My name is Nancy Johnston, 1147 295th Street, State Center, Iowa. I came just to listen today, but feel the need to talk. I spoke in front of the council last year. I owned a property on Donald Street. And we lovingly rehabbed that for my daughter, who was intent to buy it from us. And in the process, she was planning a wedding, so we were not required to have the home registered. And then they were offered a job transfer, and they moved. And I was not aware of the actions that were being discussed. If I had been, I would have had the opportunity to try to register that property. And it's unfortunate because, as I understand it, it was left to the neighborhood association person to communicate. There was nothing directly communicated to me as a homeowner. And I feel like they cherry-picked who they wanted to communicate that information to, because I did not know anything about it until the next spring after I wintered away. So my option was I let the home sit empty for almost a year. That's a huge loss of income. I had young families, as they said, looking for affordable, nice housing. My house was gorgeous, and it would have been very well suited to a young family, young couple in the campus neighborhood. And I sold the property kicking and screaming because I had no option to keep it. It didn't make sense to let it sit empty. And so it's really distressing to me to now know that your actions were not supported by the governor, and I lost my home because of it. And what was really distressing was, if I had qualified for a hardship, I would have been granted the LOC, and that would have transferred with the property to the new owner, and the new owner would have been able to keep the LOC. That was just ridiculous. I think the cap at 25% is ridiculous. When you have numbers of 60% or whatever, you're never going to get there. So why set an arbitrary number like 25%?
So Nancy, if I could, you can speak on it wherever you'd like to, but this is all water under the bridge at this point. I'm curious, just with your perspective, are there things on the list that you would like us to consider? That cap is now gone, and people have different opinions on that. But are there things that you would like us to hear about the list? We want to hear from you because you've invested a lot of time and money. Any thoughts that we would benefit from?
I just think it's unreasonable. I paid my taxes. Homeowners pay their taxes. And I think you have policies in place to deal with rental issues. There's ordinances in place. If somebody's not happy with what's happening in their neighborhood, there's ordinances that can deal with that. And I just think it's very discriminatory to specify by neighborhood. And I just think, as a property owner, I think you're just replacing it with something else to take away the right of a property owner. And I
So
don't
you'd
think
want
it's
us to do more
fair.
on the enforcement side?
What's that?
You'd want us to do more on the enforcement side?
Yeah, because it's my understanding it's all by, what's the word I'm looking for? Not proactive, reactive.
Okay.
And I just think that it's too bad if there's properties that are distressing the neighborhood. There's a reason for that, and there's probably an ordinance to deal with it. Otherwise, I think that they're eclectic neighborhoods. You want the university, but it seems like they don't want the students. So eclectic neighborhoods are great. You know, you have retirees and young families and students, and they all cohabitate in a neighborhood, and it's a diverse neighborhood. And I just think that's an awesome thing for a community. And I just don't want to see you impose other restrictions that aren't fair to a homeowner. I suffered greatly, and
Thank you. Thank you for your comments.
Yep.
Others? Okay, we're going to close public comment.
Hey, John, I have a question that I'd like to pose. I'd be curious if any of the landlords or realtors would be interested in speaking to this. There is, one of the proposals is to limit the number of tenants to the square footage of the house. And I'm curious if that's something that would receive pushback. I mean, maybe the renters or the realtors and landlords would say there shouldn't be any limitation. You could have as many tenants as possible, but I'm curious if there's any kind of reasonable limitation that the realtors and landlords would find palatable. And maybe nobody wants to speak to that, but I'm curious if anyone would find that interesting.
All right, it's a work session tonight. I'm going to make an exception. We'll go ahead and reopen it. We will be done at 7:30 with public comment. Is anyone that's interested in addressing Councilman Garton's question?
Question, are you talking about in the city overall or just in the rental cap neighborhood for the square footage?
Yes, so that ship has sailed, so we no longer have particular zones. So this would just be in general. This is going to come up in our conversation. I'm a little surprised nobody talked about it. It'd just be helpful as a data point for someone to address the question of whether there's any upward limitation. Can you have 20 people living in a 2-bedroom house? Is that okay?
And just so everyone's aware too, we're not going to, this process is not going to stretch on for months. We're going to have this session. The council will give direction to staff. They will put together a draft changes to an ordinance. Once that is done, we will make sure people who may be interested can view that for a period of 2 weeks. We'll then have a meeting. We'll have public comment. It will not be a first reading. Then final changes be made, and then we're going to go ahead and we'll go through the 3 readings. So we want to move through this quickly. So if realtors, anybody else wants to address council on this topic, this is the best evening to do it because we're actually in discussion stage and the council wants to hear people's opinions. We were accused by people that we were not listening, we're not trying to engage. We are trying to engage, but it requires a 2-way conversation. So with that said, I think just a second, please. You did put a card up here, is that correct, ma'am? You're welcome to come up here. And then anyone else who has not spoken yet is welcome to come up. And then if there's no one else that wants to speak, you can return for 3 more minutes, all right?
My name is Mary Warren, 3121 Maplewood Road. My husband and I own rental property in Ames. I'd like the council to move on from this issue. I think there's other things in Ames that need time and attention. I think the legislature spoke loud and clear that they're tired of dealing with issues like this also. And I think this city council should take the wait and see approach and see if there are issues. I think the Ames Police Department can give you data on if there are problems. And I'd also like to see an owner-occupied ordinances. I think there's some real eyesore properties in the city right now. There's one on Northwestern in the 1200 block on the east side, second house in before 13th Street. It's an owner-occupied property. It looks like a hoarder house. Northwestern on 13th Street. 13th Street is one of the main thoroughfares, but that's an owner-occupied house, and so there's no ordinance to control it. The yard was not mowed last year. It's not mowed this year. If you follow the Ames on the Go app at all, there's multiple complaints about bushes that are blocking the view. If you go to the assessor's website and look it up, it appears that most of those are owner-occupied properties. If those were rental properties, they would have to trim back the bushes. Those are site hazards at corners. These are all things that maybe the city council should work on an owner-occupied ordinance for health, safety, life, quality things. When you talk about owner-occupied rentals, regular rentals like the ones my husband and I own, we have to have safe smoke detectors, you have to have carbon monoxide detectors. Owner-occupied places that are not being inspected, if you're worried about life, health, and safety, they need to be inspected. They need to have those same, safety things. That's my point of view. The fire department, police department can give you the reports on what kind of calls they have, and we get a report if there's any police calls, any complaint calls that come in on our rentals, and month after month, there are none. So the realtors can tell you also, because they comprised the report last year. I think there's other issues that the city needs to work on. They need to work on multiple things I've shared with different council members. And the rental issue, month after month, takes your time and energy. Thank you.
Thank you. Is there anyone else who's not spoken tonight that wants to speak? You're welcome to return.
Thanks, Nancy Marion again. This won't take long. But Tim, I do think that there would be realtors in our group who would be happy to sit down and talk about some of those questions, maybe put forth some ideas that we could bandy about, as it were, creating maybe a simple formula for square footage bedroom parking might be a way to go. I don't know. I do think you ought to require an LOC in any situation. Any house where you have a roomer, if you're worried about health, life, and safety, have an LOC for everybody. If you have 3 offenses, if you really do have landlords that are that bad, and I'm sure they're, I don't know, but anyway, give them some nuisance remediation classes and make the occupants come as well. Because sometimes the owners can't do anything with an occupant, I'm sure. And then I just wanted to say that I applaud the rent abatement idea. If you've got someone that won't correct a terrible situation, go for it. I think it's a good idea. So.
Great, thanks.
Thank you.
Good morning, Mayor, or good evening, Mayor, City Council. Luke Jensen, 2519 Chamberlain. I want to offer this just on behalf of the Central Iowa Board of Realtors. I'm our current president this year, and I know that there's been ongoing dialogue. To my knowledge, our team and members at the board have not been included or invited to a conversation that would be not in a public setting, but in one that would be a more informal setting to allow for dialogue like this. I think many of the items that were identified from our membership was first seen in the staff report. And so perhaps, I know you have a timeline and a schedule to move through this, but I wanted to extend that invitation to our SCAN representatives, as well as any council members that would want to have a input session on some of these items and try to address some of those things like 20 residents in a single family home. I would like to think I would know the answer on that, but so we would like to visit about that if the group finds that to be a beneficial use of people's times.
Okay.
Hello again. I just wanted to say that for
Name, please. Again.
Oh, Paul Adama, 229 South Russell Avenue. I just wanted to say that for owner-occupied rentals, I had 2 renters, and I had to get a temporary letter of compliance, so that includes smoke alarms and all that. So,
thank you. Anyone else? Okay, close public input. All right, council, we have allotted 40 minutes for conversation, so we will be done at 8.
John, what do you want from us in terms of next steps? So would you want us to say we want to move particular items from the quality of life, health, and safety to the staff for further action? Is that what you have in mind?
Staff is looking for direction in terms of whether or not council wants to do anything, or if they want to do a little bit, if they want to do a lot. And so consequently, if there's been adequate discussion already this evening amongst
This joint project of the Iowa Legislative
amongst council, and you're ready to start moving things forward, you certainly can proceed to do that. But as I think it'd be appropriate to try and follow the categories and the bullets if we can, to try and allow staff to have an idea what you're talking about. Not that you have to say yes to bullet 1, no to bullet 2, yes to bullet 3. It's just more or less just picking things. But I think that we're not going to try and wordsmith or craft an ordinance tonight. It's more or less conceptually, what do you want to accomplish? And if it's nothing, then it's nothing, and we move on. I think the key is that council needs to give some direction. You heard Luke, make an offer. To my knowledge, no one has ever contacted me asking to meet with council or to have any kind of a work session. He's now done that publicly. That's up to you. You have to make a decision. All I know is that I think that everyone, including staff, wants this to be a very short, sweet, to the point, and move on. And contrary to some of the comments, we have not been dwelling on this forever and ever. The point is that we dealt with it, passed an ordinance. Now we are back to a situation where we have to go ahead and look at it again. And now the question is, do you want to do anything?
If I could start just speaking from a student perspective, I was at the time of the last rental ordinance and now against the idea of adding it because I do believe it limits affordable housing. As we've seen tonight, affordable housing is one of the main issues for students living in Ames. There are some things I definitely do agree with, though, from this. And for the record, I did disagree with the state repealing this ordinance just because I think we're a home rule state, but that's beside the point. Points 3 and 4 under the health and safety issues. So when we're looking at making LOC non-transferable with repeated violations, one part I don't agree with that is necessarily tying that to the property. I think if there was a way to tie that to the owner of the residence, I don't know if that's possible, but I think the punishment should be to the owner who is making these violations rather than to the property itself, because I don't think you should be allowed to continually break those rules and get away with it or essentially keep having a rental. To the fourth point, rent abatement, I think it's something that is definitely of big interest for organizers in Ames as well as students, because there are instances where people are not their end of the lease is being fulfilled with rent every single month, but it's not reciprocated by the landlord itself. And I think rent abatement is something that is being tried in other places in the state, and it's something that staff should look into now. And the last thing that I'll say, which is not on the health and safety list, but I think it's clear, at least to me and the people who I've talked to, that while mold is completely and able to be enforced by the city, many people are not aware of this. If the city were to make that more clear within the code, it would give people more of an ability and make it more clear for landlords that it is their responsibility. On the vermin issue, I don't agree that it should be added to that to be more specific, because there are instances where the tenant is responsible for that. And so if we were to say landlords are responsible for mold and vermin, then that would fundamentally change sort of what the ordinance that we currently have says. And I don't think it's really making a difference if we add that clear language to mold. And I think it would help. While it does not harm anything, I do think it would help in giving more power back to the tenants in making those discussions with their landlord. And so that's kind of the filter through which I see a lot of these issues, because when it comes to students and representing them on the council, I think these are issues they're excited about and things that they want.
Thank you, Devin.
I have a question about the rental abatement, if I could ask you. I like the idea of this, particularly where it comes to a mechanism to ensure that people really do get an LOC now that they're more generally available. And it's a strong motivator to get someone to actually apply for the LOC and bring their property up to safety standards. I see it, the legislation also in the state code allows us to authorize rent to not be paid if generally the property doesn't comply with the housing code. Not being registered is a pretty obvious case of that. That's very easy to say. If you could just say it's not registered, that's that. But the other factor is not complying with the housing code. I don't understand how that would work. I mean, is there a hurdle where a tenant would say, there's a problem with the smoke detector or something like that, and then, how is that verified before they stop paying rent? Do you know how that sort of thing works?
So I talked with Iowa City, and they said that they had used it 4 times so far, and it sounds like mostly for when landlords aren't registering their property. That's the instance that I would see it most helpful here. So we have, for example, a property that we know is a rental, we're not able to get in touch with the landlord. We can't serve him. We've tried to issue a citation. We can't find him. I'm guaranteeing we find him if he stops getting his rent. So this would be a really good tool for that. It's not something that would be used on a regular basis. This is a pretty rare occasion. We already have citations available if we need to do something where the landlord is not complying with the rental code. So for normal instances, we would issue a citation and try to get compliance that way.
So I'm definitely interested in pursuing that for unregistered properties. I think that's a really clear case. For anything that requires more interpretation, is more subtle, I think we need to think about that harder.
Mark, can you explain how it works? Can
Yeah,
it be used
and-
for other? And do we have to adopt it, or is the right already there, always there for the tenant?
Well, in some ways, that some forms of this are in the Uniform Residential Landlord Tenant Act. I mean, it says that the tenant's not responsible for paying the rent if a landlord doesn't provide heat, water, and electricity, or those sort of things. Heat,
But those
water.
are enumerated, like it's a list of items, right?
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah, and the Iowa City ordinance has that list too, but the state code just sort of says that the tenant's not responsible for that, or they have the right to the money back if they've paid the rent for the month. I think you would have to go to court to enforce that if you're a tenant under the state law. So this is a way of making it a city ordinance, so that it would be the housing official that would issue an abatement. The rent is now an abatement order. The rent is now abated. So, and that's how the Iowa City one works. Iowa City says that building official may order rent abated when the building official determines that the owners failed to provide an essential service, water, sewer, electricity, heat, failed to remedy a condition that poses a substantial risk to the health or safety of the tenant. And I realize that's, what is a substantial risk is a question. And or rented a dwelling unit without a valid rental permit. So.
It could be tied into, and maybe tied into that first bullet too, which to me seems like the one that we have the most consensus on, and that's holding folks accountable for the standards we already have in place. East Lansing had a good example of this. I saw at that International Town and Gown thing I went to, where they have a system of, a certain amount of violations, and then you start to kick in suspension of rental permit, and then eventually revocation if the issues continue. And to me, that one seems, like I said, the one that everybody at least says that they want us to undertake, enforcement of what we've got. So I'm supportive of that one, and maybe we could find a way to, your third strike before your rental permit revocation would be rent abatement or something like that, where could be maybe one of the steps before revocation of the permit entirely, perhaps.
Mm-hmm.
Can we do a motion on that one?
So I do have just one comment
Yeah.
that's related to that.
Mhm.
I guess, question.
Yeah.
I'd like to see if we can just kind of discuss all these in general and then come up and clean up, unless you definitely want to.
I was just thinking that one was the most consent, but
Okay.
I'm fine waiting.
Right.
Either way, but Chris's question.
My only question there is, somewhere in that process, and it'd be interesting to see how East Lansing handles this,
Yeah.
is what if you have a tenant that wants to get kicked out?
That wants to get kicked out?
So they don't want to honor the rest of the term of their lease, throws a number of parties. So it's just an example. I mean, it's not something that could be common, but it is something that could happen, and the landlord doesn't have any control over that. And so there has to
Landlords
be,
don't have in their leases any
there has to
provision
be,
for,
well, it would just seem like there has to be something in the process to accommodate that in some way, shape, or form.
yeah, I mean, I would think, yeah, good question. A landlord wouldn't have an option of kicking someone out if they violated the terms of the lease?
It's just a concern.
Yeah. I don't know. I mean, that one,
And
I don't know.
I'm not saying it needs to be addressed. It's something to keep in the back of our head.
I
It'd be
did-
interesting to know how, if that's something that's happened in other communities.
Yeah.
Well, I think we're looking at a policy level, conceptual things tonight. We don't want to start getting into leases or what if this or what if that. I think your point is well taken, Chris. I think that's, a good counterpoint. The point is that what we've heard, I think what council has heard is that some of the issues that are causing a desire to control rentals is garbage, parking, over occupancy, nuisance parties. Is it the city's responsibility to be the parent, so to speak, and go in there and always be citing, or is it the person who has the contract with the tenant?
Right.
And I think that's the high level. And I think what you do is if that's what you're interested in pursuing after, give direction to staff. They can come back with it. We're going to have a 2-week comment period. People can give input. If that during that time you want to get, as Luke suggested, having a meeting to talk about that. The point is, I think we want to get council wants to get some direction what you're interested in, and those issues I think will probably surface as well too.
Yeah, and to Sarah's point about noise violations that might be sensitive in nature, say, I think that wouldn't rise to the point of a misdemeanor violation within our. My guess is the police department isn't going to write a violation up on a noise issue that's on a sensitive subject. Right. Rather, the violation or the misdemeanor trigger would come only from like a party noise nuisance issue. So I'm hoping that I don't want to, punish anyone for sensitive issues, but I think for nuisance parties is where I meant for that. So, so is it all right if I make a motion on that one? So I would direct staff to bring back ideas for us on how to hold owners responsible for nuisance issues of rental properties.
Okay. Is there a second?
Second.
Well, can I help you be a little more
Want more
specific?
specifics?
You went through a tiered process, repeated
Yeah.
violations.
Yeah, a tiered system. Yeah.
Is
so
this
that-
is a bullet and a 3 sub bullets what you're looking at?
We'll probably rely on that.
Yeah, that would be fine. Yep, exactly.
I don't want to mix and match the,
The rent abatement, you don't want to.
Yeah, because I think that would not be a reason to kick in the third level on it. That's a whole
That's
different
fine.
level of violation.
Yeah, we can keep that separate. I'm fine with that. So just the bullets about suspending or revoking an LLC, fees, and then an incentive program for those in compliance, perhaps.
Which one?
Where's that?
That's the third bullet.
That's the
Issue longer LOC
Oh, I
for
see.
those in
Thank you.
compliance. So
Right.
the carrot rather than
Right.
the stick.
All right. Discussion?
Well, and to Chris's point, I think it would be helpful, whether it's in the information we get from staff or input from the public, the process that takes place when a landlord is trying to evict a tenant. I've heard that it's an incredibly difficult process, or can be, and so I think that we need to keep that in mind as we're looking at this potential solution.
And just to be mindful that there are cases where it's really spiraled out of the owner's control in sometimes, and they've done what they can, and they've ended up with a lot of angry neighbors, and want to make sure it doesn't go too far and just ruin their whole business.
So this doesn't pass responsibility, right? It'd make it so the person who is the tenant is still responsible for their actions, but the landlord is ultimately responsible after multiple repeated violations, right?
I think staff maybe would bring back a number of suggestions. Like there might be an infraction that would go to the resident, but then I'm just brainstorming here, but perhaps upon multiple infractions, then you start to see fines go to the property owner, maybe in addition to or instead of the resident. We'd have to
Let's
staff to
let
bring back their
Sarah, why don't you clarify what the
recommendations on that.
what the intent was, since my understanding was, no, it's switching from the tenant to the owner.
So like
The
a
property
noise
owner.
complaint violation, let's say it costs you a fine of like.
It would be both. The person would be cited for the noise violation, but you're making a determination that the owners would be responsible ultimately for the violations. After repeated violations, there'd probably be a temporary suspension, and after that, a revocation if it keeps going. That's what we're talking about.
I think you also
Not
have
fining
to,
the owner now.
you have to remember that there's a difference between criminal and civil violations too.
Right.
So the noise complaints that you're talking about, those are criminal in nature and can be cited by the police department to the tenants that are there.
Yeah, it goes to-
When we're enforcing on a garbage can or weeds or something like that, we're still working with the owner. We're not enforcing on the tenant for those instances.
It's both is what I'm saying. The tenant will be, the appropriate person will be actually be taken care of, but ultimately this leads to the right to have the LOC. That's the stick here for multiple violations.
Right.
Just so you understand that that's what's intended to do.
My only issue with that, I guess, is it leads to more evictions and it gives more power then to the landlords in giving them excuses to evict a resident. If you give them more firepower in that relationship, I think it leads to abuses, and I don't think I myself or students would ultimately like that. And that's my position, I guess, on that.
Well, Devin, the counterpoint is if people, as students, are living in a pleasant way and taking care of the garbage and things they're responsible for in the lease, there'll be no issue.
Right.
It's really the quality of life I think what we sometimes lose sight of is it's the people that live around the rentals that are really being affected as well too. And so we're trying to say we represent all 66,000 residents. And so students are part of that, renters are part of that as well too. So the point is that we're not trying to punish anybody for being good neighbors. It's
Right.
just those that are becoming the problem issues. We're trying to get that under control, which goes back to Representative Sexton's point. Why don't you pass more ordinances to deal with the issues that exist? And that's what we're trying to respond to.
Yeah, fair enough. And I can agree with that sentiment. I just think that the people who are responsible for those actions should be held completely responsible for those actions, and that the landlord shouldn't be responsible for, let's say, a noise complaint. Ultimately, I think that's not, like, it's not their fault. And it will it's giving them more reasons to evict. And I don't think that's a necessary punishment for, let's say, a noise complaint, right? I don't think every single punishment should constitute that, right? And I think that ultimately that's what it leads to. I completely understand your point though, that this is about the neighbors, and that if you're a good tenant, you will not be punished under this.
Yeah.
Well, ultimately, if it's your property, it is your responsibility. So I understand it's not their fault, but it's still, I think it's kind of come down to two different things ultimately. It is an owner's property. And so if there are constant issues at the property, even if they weren't the ones, even if the owner isn't there having the big party that creates all the noise, because it's their property, it is their responsibility in a sense.
And I can agree with it after a certain level, right? I just think that bar should be pretty high to begin with of when you start holding the landlord responsibility. I don't think it should be after first violation. And I guess this is something that would be included in whatever staff comes up with, the level which this is enforced. I just think that the bar needs to be set kind of high for when that happens, because I don't want it to be used as an excuse then to evict somebody and take advantage of a tenant themselves, which I think could potentially happen.
Okay, point well taken. All right.
For sure. That's good.
Everyone understand the motion? Those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed or abstaining? Motion carried. Next item.
So let's stay on this quality of life, health and safety. I'd like to try to stay with the low-hanging fruit. The prohibition or restriction on the addition of off-street parking seems like an issue that we could find some consensus on. So I'll try that. I'll move that we direct staff to bring us ideas on the prohibition or restricting of additional off-street parking.
A second.
Citywide or in certain areas?
Well, yeah, actually, that's a good question.
That is a good question.
I'm assuming.
My understanding is right now, the goal is we're not trying to pinpoint any particular area. Because the point is, then all of a sudden we're trying to target certain areas, which is you're starting to move towards, we're trying to cap or punish those. I think we have to look at it citywide essentially.
Right.
And the motion is prohibit or restrict. And the question is do you look at one
Perhaps
or the other?
restriction, yeah.
You do restrict.
So for purpose of conversation, what would be the downside of this?
If you want to add a
If you have a-
spare stall off the side of your driveway
You
where
wanna
you
add
don't
a
have a
wall.
garage
At your house,
at your house.
right now,
Right.
your place.
That happens all the time.
So your occupancy ordinance added more tenants. The minimum required parking spaces right now is 2 off-street parking spaces. So say you can have 4 or 5 and you want to get vehicles off the street. If we prohibit it, you wouldn't be able to do that.
Okay. I'm
So
gonna-
do you allow more on private property or do you want them
I
on the
guess-
street?
This is prohibiting it.
I appreciate the clarification. I'm going to withdraw this motion. The last one I thought maybe would also be low-hanging fruit, that if someone is circumventing, basically flipping us off and doing what they want to do anyway and not going to the LLC, then I don't know why we would think, why they think they should be eligible to receive an LLC for a substantial period of time. So I think that's reasonable. I'm going to move that we ask staff to come back with a proposal on that item.
Which one is that?
This
The
is the
last
last
bullet.
item.
Make illegal rentals ineligible to receive the LLC.
You want to read that out loud, Tim, so Aaron can get it down the.
So I would move that we would ask staff to come back with proposals with respect to making illegal rentals ineligible to receive an LLC for a substantial period of time.
Second.
All right. Discussion?
What if it's, I'm just brainstorming, what if it's not on purpose? What if they've been operating an illegal rental accidentally? And they're like, oh, shoot.
How do we know?
Let me make it right. Well, here's some
All the
jokes.
landlords are laughing.
But I mean, really, what if somebody didn't know that they couldn't be renting to Susie and so, that they didn't pay attention when the city sent it?
It'd
don't
be hard to determine that.
know. Yeah, just
We've spent so much time on the subject.
okay, they
of
better
regulating
know.
Rentals, I'd be hard pressed to imagine such a person.
They better know. No, that's true. Okay, that's fine.
Right,
I was just
yeah.
checking.
Anything else?
I think the bigger issue is people who are just flaunting.
Sure.
Typically, people that don't know that they need to be registered are the owner occupied examples. When you buy it for your child and you think because your child is there, you can have anybody you want. So they often
So it might be,
don't realize that they actually do.
it might be accidental.
So some of this we could ask, hopefully realtors already are informing their clients with, if they know the intended use of the property, they're explaining these are the things you need to do to stay in compliance.
All right.
That's fair.
Anything else? Those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Oppose? Carried. All right, so just a point of clarification too, is that we say ask staff to come back with, that is basically, they're going to take this and they're going to come back with a draft
In ordinance.
changes to ordinances, not just come back with the staff report, just so we're clear on that.
And if it turns out that we have something that we move forward tonight and we wrestle with it and we decide, oh, maybe there are some unintended consequences that we need to consider, and we can always tweak it or get rid of it. So just because we're taking a next step doesn't have to be that. But we've heard of a number of situations where people have intentionally bought property for rental. And Sarah, could you speak to that? I mean, is there any merit to the concern that there are people who are just simply disregarding the rental housing limitations and doing what they want?
I'm sure
That's a tough.
That's a hard question.
It's
Andy.
okay.
I would like to say
Asking
no. I don't know their intent. I just know when we stumble across them, we try to bring them into compliance.
And that
So,
doesn't,
Do you want compliance if we stumble across them now? Is it better to get compliance and make them a legal rental, or tell them no and now they have to sell the property or it gets abandoned? Those are things you would have to consider.
We'll have to consider that.
and I think the staff has the flexibility to say, okay, they could come back and suggest, for example, a warning. I don't know. The point is,
Right.
I think we're trying to get them general concepts and let them, and I think.
Yeah, I think a warning might be a way to.
They need to.
No.
All right, so I've heard conversation regarding rent abatement.
Yep.
Did we vote?
Is that,
No,
is that,
we did.
that was
That's
withdrawn.
one
Is there
of
anything that you want to pick up? Because I want to try and get through this category and go into the next one.
It's
it
not on.
current-
You made a motion already.
Is it
No, no.
currently
No, it
available
was
in?
withdrawn.
I'd like to make a motion.
Oh, go ahead.
He withdrew it.
I never made it.
I thought that
No,
was,
Tim withdrew something else.
Oh, I'm
Which
sorry.
I still want to go back and talk about, but
Parking.
Okay.
Go ahead, David.
but go ahead. I'll come back to it.
Tim withdrew his motion.
Wait a minute.
All right,
He
let's go.
withdrew one motion, but there's one on the floor still, isn't there?
I thought there was one on the floor about
Yes.
making illegal rentals ineligible.
We just
just
voted on
voted
that.
on
Okay, we did. All right,
Okay.
good.
Yeah.
Okay, so back to rent abatement. I would move to ask the staff bring us back proposals for implementing rent abatement for unregistered rentals and other seriously non-compliant issues.
Second.
Discussion?
Do you like the way it patterned after Iowa City?
I liked the way that sounded. I haven't thought about it a lot, but I
Could
like
be
it.
a starting point for us then, right?
Discussion? Hearing none, those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed or abstaining? Carried.
So I just want to briefly go back to the off-street parking. So when I made the comment that I did, it wasn't that I don't think we shouldn't do anything. It's maybe there's another mechanism. It's square footage as a percentage of lot or something like that, so that you can't add 6 parking spots, but you can add a spare spot off the side of your driveway. So I didn't necessarily have a problem with the motion.
If you're going to talk about parking, zoning, Kelly, you want to say anything about it before? Maybe a zoning issue then we're talking about? Just before you bring up something?
Right.
Kelly might want to speak to it. So you have any ideas? What are you thinking to add?
No, I was kind of hoping staff would come back with
Oh, do you want to add off-street parking requirements?
some ideas
Well,
of just
let's-
talking about how to address off-street parking.
To add it.
because-
You want to add in this case?
Yes.
Yes. Require adding for an LLC. Any comments about?
Limit
Or
adding.
or limit adding.
Oh, you want to limit that, that you wanted to add?
Allow it with limitations.
Okay.
That's what,
Yes.
Before I was thinking restrict it, not allowing anything.
So if a property wants to add 2 more parking spaces to accommodate the 4 bedrooms they have, they could do that, but they can't pave their whole backyard.
Basically,
That's the
yes.
Yeah.
Or pave the front yard, or pave all the
So
sides.
you want to accommodate off-street parking.
Yeah, we're going to have situations where people are adding parking all over town just as a spare spot in your front yard. So actually, if I take a half step backwards, I mean, really, there's a bigger issue here. If we're just doing this for people who have LOCs, how do we even think about somebody who has an LOC that would give it up, do these, and then reapply for an LOC? I mean, because in every single one of these cases, not the bigger nuisance issues, but in every single one of these, you could do that, and there's no way to address it. So how do we think through that?
So there's already limitations on parking. You can't park in the front yard, so you can't pave areas in the front yard for parking, and you can't cover more than 40% of, 60% has to be left open.
So it,
The backyard.
Backwards.
those are pretty limited limitations. City's been very vigilant on the front yard issue, but for the most part, you can do quite a bit of parking under the lot coverage standard. But to your base question, how do you prevent someone from giving up something for a very short amount of time and then saying it's new, especially something like the parking issue? I think you have to not let grandfathered surfaces into the equation. I think if someone comes in and has a full paved parking lot and that's not something we intend to allow, you probably shouldn't allow that to be a registered property. So I think you have to look at some of these standards about whether you want to allow someone to continue as a grandfathered thing once you become a rental property. Even if it's okay as a homeowner, it's an expectation that that is not the case as a rental property. So certain standards that fits really well, those things where you might give up something for a very short amount of time to go make an improvement to the property and then try to re-register to say, that's grandfathered. I think that's how I have to look at it.
Right now is, what is required in terms of off-street parking and it all being paved, or are existing houses allowed to have gravel parking, or can you talk about that for a minute?
Current gravel can remain as long as it's maintained, so they have to maintain it. There has to be gravel there. If it's getting spread out, we require that they put barriers in. A brand new rental has to pave.
Everything.
They have to have a minimum of 2 spaces,
Only 2.
so that would have to be paved.
So the question is do you want to increase the required parking off-street? In other words, if you have a 4-bedroom home,
Right.
do you have to have 4 parking spaces off-street on the site?
Yeah, I'm trying to see what your desire, what are you trying to accomplish?
I think we're mixing a couple things here, right? Because there's the question of the street being clogged with cars being a nuisance issue for a neighborhood. And then there's a separate issue of like, we want to limit the number of occupants in this neighborhood. And I'm really uncomfortable with using the one as a proxy for the other. And I think it's particularly bad when we have near campus neighborhoods where it's completely practical to live there without a car. And there are
Yes.
a relatively few number of people who will do that. I think we agree that a lot of people will show up with cars and they'll clog the streets if they can. But for those people who actually don't bring a car, we want them to live there. We don't want to make it so they can't live in the house simply because they might have a car.
Yep.
So I really want to try to hold these ideas separate when we're going through this.
Yeah, I'm on board with that. I don't love minimum parking requirements.
So is there any interest in anything relative to off-street parking at this point in time tonight?
I know.
Well, this is more about on-street parking, but I think we have an interesting opportunity here to think about a pilot program for resident parking permits in a neighborhood. Because the idea just being that if we have a small experiment and try to address the issue of the street being clogged, which causes problems for the neighborhood, people don't like it, and come up with a system that says each property gets so many, parking tags or whatever, and by controlling that number, then you control the number of spots that are free on the street. There are a lot of details here to get right, but it's something that hasn't been done in Ames, to my knowledge, except at ISU, and it could have some interesting effects. And now it'll probably throw us off our schedule if we're going to do a pilot program and an experiment. But still, it's worth thinking about.
Okay. Any motion on the parking or not? None? All right. I'm just going to go through these bullets, make sure we don't miss anything. Requiring a local agent. Any interest on that?
Sarah, is that something that would be helpful for enforcement? To require a local agent? I'm not sure about the who resides in Story County part, because I'm not sure whether that's more effective than somebody who lives in Polk County or, one of the other surrounding counties. But would it be helpful to have someone?
I guess I can't really say if it would be helpful because I don't know that we have numbers to show that those that reside outside of Story County have more violations or it takes them longer to correct them. Someone living in California could correct it more quickly than someone next door, depending on the circumstances. So I don't know that if there's enough to say one way or the other. It would just be your preference.
All right, hearing no motion, how about making the LLC non-transferable or making all LLCs non-transferable? Those two topics.
With repeated violations, well, we might already consider the revocation of an LLC with repeated violations under the first bullet. So
I'm not sure what that
that's
accomplishes.
sort of extra then.
All right. How about prohibiting and closing of porches?
I think that that's been a significant problem in the past, but I think maybe that has to do with the intensity of rentals as well. And I'm not sure whether we're interested in going there and maybe it's not the intensity,
Occupancy.
the occupancy, and the number of bedrooms. So it's not so much that it creates additional living space, it's that it can create an additional bedroom. That has been a problem in the past. And so I do think that's problematic, but I'm not sure how you separate that issue out from other things that show up in the lists that are coming up.
Okay. All right. And then the last one in this group would be, Devin brought the point about trying to clear up or make more clear the issue on mold.
Where's that?
On mold, Devin brought this up. It's
not on the
It's not on the
Oh,
list.
it's not on the, I see.
He brought it up about the fact about he doesn't think it's very clear, or students aren't made aware of it, or is it more or less trying to get students to be aware of the fact that what's in the code right now does pertain to mold. Sarah, can you just
So he asked if it would be better to clarify, the code currently doesn't specifically state that mold itself is a violation, just that the unit needs to be maintained in a clean and sanitary manner. So he's asking if it would be helpful to have mold specifically
Listed.
spelled out in the code.
Good question. I've had a question from a constituent too about off-gassing of like it was a brand new place and they were concerned about the fumes too. So I don't know how you,
Wow.
Like
I mean,
vinyl fumes, that sort of thing?
what's that?
Vinyl fumes? that
I
sort of
assume
thing?
so,
It was
yeah.
formaldehyde.
Yeah. Formaldehyde that comes off of, yeah.
Well, that would probably fall underneath your definition of.
But like something like
health or
the building product is regulated by federal standards. If it's an allowed product to be produced and it has formaldehyde in it, that has to meet a federal standard. You can't have a local health code that says a legal building material that's intended for indoor use can't be used indoors.
What if, I mean,
If they use something that's intended for outdoor use and meets a different standard, that could be different. But in general, you would be it'd be a stretch.
This is the
to
real
take
question, the
something
way
that's
the ordinance
building
written, do we
material.
want to start a list of items or just a general?
I mean, and what if it makes
We had
them
one
sick?
for
Does
that.
that count as a violation of their
No,
health? You know,
I
does it
mean,
make
it's a legal product to have. People are allergic to a variety of things or
Sure,
have health
that's
issues with different things that you or I might not have. Doesn't
Yeah.
mean it's an illegal product to produce or have.
Sure, true.
So I would say building materials are a tough one to say as a health and sanitation
allowed.
issue.
Well, will we though?
And it was a brand new building, furnished. So there was probably cheap furniture.
Yeah.
Building furnishings. It just got trapped in.
Yeah. Interesting. Okay, well, let's stick to mold then.
Is there any interest in doing it with the mold, or just let it stand as it is right now and move on? Just ask the question.
I don't know. Yeah, good question. How would we?
I just think that there are currently landlords in Ames who don't believe it's their responsibility, and they have told the residents that it is their fault, and so they don't end up going through with it, and the tenant ends up believing that, and so they don't go through the city. If it were made more clear, I think it would benefit students. Of course, if it's not the intention of council, then so be it.
But that could just be like a marketing campaign or more of a community education and outreach kind of effort, more so than maybe adding a new thing. Do you think? I mean, could we?
I think it would make it easier for that campaign to then make people aware of it if it were to be directly stated.
Like put it more prominently in places or
The problem with this, I think, as Steve pointed out, is once you start a list of things that are specifically covered, it possibly creates a presumption that things that aren't on the list are less covered.
Yeah.
Right. And I think I like the way it's phrased now, that it's really quite broad, that it's, habitability and safety and health. I mean, that's good. I think that's the right place to leave it, and maybe do outreach. If
Yeah, we could do more marketing or outreach of that exists for as a protection, perhaps.
Fair enough, and I think that's something that the campus community commissioner and somebody else could do.
Yeah, we could think to it. Good.
The other point that Sarah made is that there's also tenant-generated mold
Oh, sure. Yeah.
and also building-related mold. And so the point is that if you just put in the word mold, if they create the issue, then all of a sudden you're going to create some kind of an issue between a tenant and a landlord or something that they were just being, sloppy in terms of not using exhaust.
Is there a situation in which a tenant could even perceivably get rid of that mold without, because lots of times you have to tear down walls. It's not like a tenant has the capabilities of ever doing that in any situation. I'm pretty sure it's against lots of leases for a tenant to even undergo those corrections in the first place. And so if it is ever a tenant's responsibility, then it becomes a situation where you either live in this unhealthy environment or you leave. And that's an option that many students who I've talked to actually took. They left their apartment they were living in, continuing to pay rent in it, but they couldn't live in it because it was a health hazard.
So I'm just going to cut this short now because we want to keep on moving on. But I think the point is Sarah made it very clear. Maybe the education process is there is a tenant complaint process that we probably should be using to educate the students. You can maybe have educating that, there's issues that are not tenant-caused mold that may fall under that category. But the point is that if we put in the ordinance, then you're creating a list essentially.
Okay.
All right. All right. Anything else on this category? We're going to move on. All right. Reducing intensity of rentals. I'm just going to go through these bullets. Establishing minimum distance. Any interest in that? Prohibit owner-occupied rentals.
I think that's misleading a little bit in the wording. Correct me if it's wrong. We weren't against your recommendation against owner-occupied rentals like the gentleman here has. It's just someone could get an LLC and not move ahead and convert it to a rental and just hold it, right? Isn't that what you're saying? If you're going to establish yourself as a rental owner-occupied, then you have to get inspected and make the improvements to bring it up to meet the rental housing code requirements. Which I'm sure this gentleman here who's the owner occupied owners living in a rental, that's fine. We're not against that. I think it was the delay in getting inspected and
Yeah, it's
It would
the idea
impact-
that the LOC is an insurance policy. You
Right.
can hang on to it for 5-10 years until you sell it.
But that doesn't matter anymore.
It doesn't
now that
without the
it's-
cap.
If you get the LOC, then you've met the
Right.
standards, right? And so I don't see any reason why we
There's
should
no
threaten
purpose.
that.
Yeah, I mean, without the cap, there's no benefit in getting one to hold it.
Nope.
And
it doesn't say you have the LLC. You don't, oh, you're saying they will get the LLC?
well, that's
And
what I
make
think.
improvements?
One when they sell it.
I'm not sure.
What was the intent of this? To prohibit?
It would essentially keep properties from becoming rentals. Not a cap, but a cap,
Okay.
right?
I think that what I heard is that there's no, because the cap
No
went
interest,
away,
okay.
no interest in this.
Right. I think it's worth talking about the consanguinity clause, though. I think this is the right place for that. So just to refresh people's memory about this, this is on the rumor exception to requiring an LOC. And that is, if you're the owner of a property, then you can have up to one rumor, right, without meeting all of the safety standards of the rental code. And I think that's what the gentleman we spoke to earlier was doing. He said he also had a transitional letter of compliance. But the current law also allows not only the owner to have the rumor, but a first degree relation of the owner to be the person living there who has the rumor. So not the owner itself, but the first degree. And this seems like it's often used by people to send a son or a daughter to Ames to live in a house where inevitably a bunch of roommates appear, and all evading sort of the safety system of the LOCs. So I think we should consider revisiting that. Just the, the 1 degree of separation. I have no objection to the owner who's going to live in the house. Then I think it's fine that they should be able to rent out rooms. But
You make a motion?
Well, if it's discovered to be an illegal rental, there's a bunch of roommates there that aren't supposed to be, and now they're prohibited from getting an LOC because they were an illegal rental. Is there still action needed on that?
wouldn't that fall under the previous discussion of sort of accidentally do something and
Oh, I see.
and
Like,
it could be just
if we gave them a warning. I have trouble with this one because you might have like a parent who passes away and the child needs to live there for a time to get the house dealt with or get everything in order, get the house sorted and everything sold.
We still have a 2-year transitional letter of compliance
Yeah, that's
that
true.
just requires, fire or,
That's
smoke
true.
alarm.
You got me there.
So what would be the difference between having, in the case where we heard about tonight, where there's an owner occupied rental with 2 rentals, he got the transitional letter of compliance, but requiring a letter of compliance if you have 2 or more renters. And so that kind of becomes a moot point. You still have to comply with the rental code if you have 2 or more renters.
For 2 or more, yeah, it's the same thing. It's just the question of the one roomer allowance in the current ordinance. That's all it provides, right? One.
But it doesn't increase density necessarily.
Right.
Because once you discover that there's 3 people living there, then they have to go get their LOC.
Right. It's just a way to bring people into compliance with the rental code. I don't think it changes density. It doesn't change intensity that much because
Just requiring more people to get that LOC.
Yeah. if they're going to be renting, then they, more than one person, then they should have an LOC. And we shouldn't create the presumption that just because you're my child and you go off to Iowa State, that you get to rent one to one other person, nod, wink, wink, kind of when it turns into more than one.
All right, is there a motion or not?
I'll make the motion. I'll admit that I don't fully understand the consequences of this. So when it comes back to us, I think we look at it again carefully. But the motion is to bring us a proposal for removing the consanguinity clause.
Second.
Any further discussion? Those in favor say aye.
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 Those opposed?
Nay.
Motion carried. All right. Code requirements for new rentals. This is not for,
Sorry, just one question that sort of touched on the bullet at the last section about what we require to be brought into compliance instead of allowing them to continue as we currently do.
Yeah, that's the bullet we're just talking about right now.
Oh, the next one down.
No.
No, it's really only for new rentals.
Oh, I
New
see.
rentals.
This is for,
Oh, yeah.
so any existing LLC issued rental is essentially grandfathered in unless you say you want, if it gets changed or, transferred to a new owner. But if you have, let's just say you have a house which wouldn't even pass current building code requirements.
I see.
And then someone buys it and it has little tiny windows
I see.
and it has a couple of battery smoke detectors.
You agree?
But if you were to tear that down and build a new one, you'd have all these other requirements for life safety codes. You'd have hardwired smoke detectors. You have to have CO detectors. You have to have
New
egress, windows in it. So we're not retroactively going back and changing everything. You have to have a egress window in any basement. That's just period. You have to have it. That's how people get out. But just to say, I think it's big enough to get out. How do you know if a person isn't large enough? They can't get through a window.
Yeah.
So the point is that, and then they also, our staff has down, plumbing fixtures, guardrails. The point is that, and guardrails, stair handrails and the like. I mean, we're not talking about rebuilding an entire house. We're talking about issues that are really, you couldn't build this today, brand new. That's really the issue. That's the topic.
Also, this is not really implicated by any of the state law changes, right? This is, as I understand this bullet, it's about discretionary approvals of things that an inspector looked at and said, well, it's not 100% compliant, but it's pretty close, and this seems okay. Isn't that how it came up?
Sarah, explain, if someone applies for an LLC and you go out and inspect it, what do they have to comply with and what don't they have to comply with?
So a brand new rental.
Yeah, an existing home being turned into a rental.
So they would have to have the paved driveway, egress windows, everyone would have to have that.
No, I'm saying currently.
Plumbing up to date. Those are all things that they would have to have now. Plumbing up to date with the rental code, not with today's international code.
Okay.
So there's, the rental code basically is on the 2006 rental codes or international codes. So plumbing up to date with those. Some of it's floor drains in the basement, a lot of old home Iowa shower type hodgepodge plumbing would need to be brought up to code. That's really about it. There's a lot of discretion in there for existing situations that are maintained. As long as they're maintained, they might not be perfectly compliant, but as long as they're maintained, we will allow them to continue.
So what does this one do? Bring them up to what code then? This bullet, you want it?
Yeah. It's whatever you pick. So if you want, currently there's no rental has to comply with above grade egress windows. That's not a requirement. If you choose this, you would be asking for all new rentals, or I suppose you could say all rentals in general, which would be extremely significant.
Oh, yeah.
Need to have compliant above grade egress windows. That would be today's code. If you built a house today, that's what it would need to comply with.
If we made the change.
For new rentals.
So right now, again, I think we're a little confused here. What I think what I heard you say was that right now they are, if you were to buy an existing home that does not have egress windows, they are required to put in egress windows.
They're not.
Yeah.
Okay, so that's where I must have misheard.
No, she said it.
Only in a basement?
So the point is that
Only in a basement.
Correct.
Right.
in the basement only.
Correct.
What's the difference between a typical window and an egress window when we're talking above grade? I mean, is it all to do with the size or how it opens or?
The clear opening space is what we measure, and sill height, so how high it is off of the floor.
So if you have a window that's up like 5 feet in the air and you can open it, that does not qualify as an egress window. You have to be at least no more than 44 inches above the floor. You have to have 5.7 square feet of clear area to get through. The whole idea is it's very prescriptive, it's very clear. And the whole idea is to try and get an adult out through the window essentially.
Or a firefighter.
Does this only include single family homes or are we talking about all rentals? Just to clarify. meaning there's multi-family units.
I think my assumption when we wrote all these was that it was single family and two-family dwellings.
Just want to clarify.
So the result of that first clause, the above grade egress windows, could mean that there would be a lot of houses that are having their windows ripped out and replaced in perhaps not very sensitive ways, so we could actually be damaging the building stock or the way that these houses look. And I don't know how you offset safety and health against that, but right now we aren't really concerned about safety and health.
Well, not at this level, right? And we haven't been given a new safety concern about rentals here. That's not why we're here tonight.
Right.
What we're given is a change in the number of rentals per block, basically. And this doesn't address that at all. I think if we have an independent showing that there's a safety concern that we need to address in the rental code, then great. But if the only argument for this sort of thing is that it might have an indirect effect and making it harder to turn things into rentals, then I say we pass.
Agreed.
Yep.
Okay. Well said.
Anything else underneath? That's only had 3 bullets there. All right, incentivizing.
That's already
That's
in the
coming
works.
back anyway.
Okay. Then we got an Alaska classification, limitations on occupancy.
Yeah, this is the other way on the parking limitation.
I'm not going to go through all the bullets. I'm going to let you read through each of them, make decisions if there's anything you want to pick up on. Otherwise, we're going to go ahead and we'll close discussion for this evening.
I have one question that's not related to the occupancy limitations category. So if anybody does
Go ahead.
want to go there. It was a suggestion I got since we're looking at the rental code about any sort of minimum efficiency, energy efficiency or sustainability standards for rentals. And I don't know that I don't have enough in mind to even begin to move something, but I just wanted to plant that seed for us to think about, in terms of, well, also affecting, I suppose, affordability of rentals when it comes to utility affordability in the long term, requiring cracked windows to be taped with, like things like that, other communities have done this to sort of have a very minimum energy efficiency level for their rental homes. So again, I don't have enough fleshed out that I'd want to get into that tonight, but just kind of to plant that as a thought that maybe we could think about that in the future. That's all. Thanks.
Okay. So I had a message from the Ames Rental Association, and they have proposed a number of tenants per square foot as a methodology. And so this is the first real substantive issue tonight on terms of trying to address some kind of reasonable relationship between the number of tenants and the physical characteristics of the property.
Well, we still have our rental occupancy. It's only the cap. I mean, we still have
We have the
But we
up to
could-
5 people thing is still there.
But we don't have that based upon the square footage, do we?
No, it's just per
No, it's based on
bedroom, but is
bedrooms.
anyone not satisfied with
Yeah.
that? I think that was
So if you have
No,
2 bedrooms, how many people can you have in there?
3.
Three.
2 bedrooms?
Yeah.
3 people.
So you couldn't have 20 people.
No, but in the cap neighborhoods, you could now add
You can have 5.
bedrooms.
Up to 5.
So that,
No, you've added.
yeah.
Up to 5 people.
but that's the concern, I think,
Oh,
that
So
there
the
wouldn't.
freezing of the bedrooms that we did doesn't exist anymore?
It does.
Yeah.
So you can, in the near campus neighborhoods, you can add bedrooms, but you can't use them
increase
to count
occupancy.
occupancy.
So
and if you took your house off the LOC
that's my next.
and you added a bedroom, you'd have to bring back anything though that was grandfathered in before. And that's not, I mean, that might be a burden, like bringing up guardrails and whatever that was.
But if
Because
it's just a bedroom if that's all you do, if the house is completely compliant and you just want to add 2 more bedrooms, then
Yeah.
you could do
yeah,
that, right?
that's true. If the house were already.
Well, there's also a fairness issue, right, with people who currently don't hold LOCs and who don't have the freeze applied to them as the current landlords do.
Or parts of town.
Or other parts of town, yes. I'm just not sure what our goal is. I think if our goal is to control the intensity or control the occupancy in particular neighborhoods, like we intended with some of our past decisions, I'm not sure why you wouldn't look at the freezing of the bedrooms issue.
Should make a motion.
I think we should look at the freezing of the bedrooms, but I'm trying to decipher the note in the staff report. And I apologize, my brain is somewhat muddled because of this illness I have, but we've got the note. First, for near campus neighborhoods, the occupancy ordinance freezes the number of bedrooms that count towards the occupancy at the number existing on January 1st, 2018. Adding bedrooms to a property would not increase the number of potential renters. So I was under the impression that we weren't allowed to use the near campus neighborhood designation anymore because those are our cap neighborhoods, but we can still use it here as long as we're not talking about.
You
the past.
created two separate neighborhood types.
It overlapped a lot.
Yeah.
Yes,
Right.
the
Near campus-
percentage cap neighborhoods are gone.
Yes. But the near campus
are there.
neighborhoods are
So
still
we
there.
can still have that.
Right.
All right.
Yep.
The removal of the concentration camp allows owners throughout the city to be able to easily remove the property from rental, add bedrooms, and then bring it back as a new rental to gain occupants. So when you say throughout the city, you really are talking other than in the near campus neighborhoods? Or are you talking throughout the city?
The whole thing.
Both.
Both near campus and all.
Yeah, I can't get my mind around that.
So Mark, if you were to go to, how would you view that in terms of having, it'd be like an overlay, wouldn't it? If you had near campus neighborhoods, had specific bedroom freezing and then rest of the community, would that be similar to an overlay type concept or not? Zoning overlay where you have.
Yeah, I mean, and we already have that because we have the defined near campus neighborhoods. We adopted a resolution with a map that established them, so.
Okay.
This suggestion was for all neighborhoods though, wasn't it?
Whether it's a rental or not.
No, through all the city. It wasn't just in the near campus, was it, this bullet?
To freeze the bedrooms?
Yeah, what was it for?
I would,
No, I was just wondering what they said. I'm not sure you agree with that. I just want to know, what was the staff on that bullet? What does it mean freeze? Well, bedrooms, is that in all neighborhoods or just in the near campus?
Well, I mean, it
Kinda
only exists for
clarify.
near campus now.
Yeah, it's
Right.
in my assumption, I think this came from Scan's email to us, but my assumption was that this was for properties that aren't currently rental properties in those near campus neighborhoods.
right.
And I believe they actually said January 1st, 2018, not
2018,
20.
yeah.
That was
Yeah.
the original freeze date. I think that's kind of the date that they'd suggested we continue.
So how does that
Okay.
relate to the note on page 2 of the staff report about removing properties from the rental housing list and then bringing them back with more bedrooms?
So it depends.
That's
That
where-
is true only in neighborhoods other than the near campus
No,
neighborhoods?
that is true only in the near campus neighborhood.
Yeah,
I see.
right,
So you would end up having to, if you go this route, you're gonna have to address that issue
correct.
Yeah.
of whether you tear down rebuild can be bigger than what it.
Right.
So that's currently a loophole. Let's say your house has 3 bedrooms right now and it's registered and you say, I have room to add a 4th bedroom in my basement. I'm going to do it. So I'm adding my window right now. I remove it from rental for a week and bring it back on. And now you're a new rental and I count 4 bedrooms when I go out for my inspection.
So the way to prohibit that would be to freeze the number of bedrooms on all properties as of January 1st, 2018 in the near campus neighborhoods. I would move that.
But you
Since we're
still have to
discussing it.
have a mechanism that,
Should be in motion for a second.
second,
Okay.
you still have to have a mechanism that doesn't allow them to remove it, right? And
No, this would, because this is counting the.
no, it wouldn't.
I think the idea
To
is
address
this would persist sort of between LOCs. right? That this would be a number that goes with the property.
The property,
that-
each
That
house
fundamentally
has a number
limits
of
the
bedrooms.
property. Is that the idea?
Right.
Right, and it's
Right.
not talking about a demolition rebuild, which is a different issue.
Right.
Okay.
Yeah, so this would freeze the number of bedrooms, even for like an owner's house. It would-
Which,
Yeah,
I mean, it
doesn't-
doesn't matter. It
have
doesn't
an
matter
LLC, right.
until they go to get the LLC, and then they would be frozen at where they were at January 1st, 2018.
Could you repeat it just so
Yeah.
Aaron gets it?
I would move that we have staff bring us back an option for freezing the number of bedrooms on all properties. That's rental and owner occupied too, in the near campus neighborhoods as of January 1st, 2018.
Is there a second?
There was, well,
Yeah, I second it.
Okay.
So just to clarify, you have someone who's in an owner-occupied house, they have 3 bedrooms.
Yep.
They have an unfinished basement, they can add a 4th.
Yeah.
It just doesn't count if they sell it and it becomes an LOC.
yeah.
Okay,
Just
Thank
for-
you.
yeah.
It
Yeah,
doesn't
they can
count
add
for the
them.
number of renters.
Right,
It's
right,
still
right.
there
Yep.
as a bedroom.
all right.
And
No,
keep in mind, this is all, then the only measure we have is the assessor's website, which again, doesn't fully align with our numbers.
And that's the one that doesn't count ceilings but requires a closet.
Mhm.
How about a wardrobe?
Wait, so the definition of bedrooms, we have to clarify that in this?
Didn't we have an
Do we have to clarify?
appeal process or something if people didn't agree with what was on the assessor's website?
So when we initially did this for all of the single-family and two-family properties, we went through our records and the assessor's records and created a spreadsheet of the bedroom count that we had. So we pulled all the files for rental properties, compared what we had, and whatever was greater is what we gave them. We emailed that out and gave them an opportunity to say, nope, that number is wrong. It's this, and here's why. Or we would go do an inspection to confirm. That's a little less possible on owner-occupied properties because we don't have the ability to get in and do those inspections.
Yeah, and we don't have our own records because they're not, no LLCs.
Right.
Right.
So again, it's based on the assessor's definition of bedrooms. Everybody understand that?
Which means you may have
Well-
non-compliant egress windows, you may have no
It's-
closets or whatever, so.
The assessor could say 5 bedrooms, we only will count 3, or vice versa.
No, yeah, but this is, for some properties, we do have our own number, and I think we would prefer that for, if we've already done an inspection, we already know what the number is, then we should use that number.
If
And
they're
for
owner,
those that we don't have a number, we should use the assessor's number.
I assume if they're owner occupied, though, we haven't done an inspection.
Right, so that's when we use the assessor.
Yeah, we have to use, yeah.
So
Yeah.
exactly.
Yeah.
So we'd have to use the assessor's number for
Whether we
the,
have it, even if it's higher, you want to use it, it's ours.
we won't have a number
I'm
for,
just trying to understand.
could be higher.
It could be higher, but that's okay, that's our assessor.
So if
That's
we
fine.
have it, you take ours regardless what it is. We don't know what.
we will only have a bedroom count for rental properties.
Right.
For
Right.
any of these additional ones we're
Yeah.
talking about, it has to be the assessor's definition because we haven't ever inspected to do a count.
Right.
That's clear, right?
Yep.
All right,
And the motion was just for properties in the near
Yeah.
campus neighborhoods.
True.
you understand the motion?
I think this is one of the issues that is approaching what you talked about, John, the concern about people being able to utilize their property as they would like to.
Right.
And so I'm going to have some concerns about this one that we'll have to sort of tease out before we vote on final version. And if there are people in the audience or people who are following and have concerns, this is one you want to sort of give us clear input on.
All right, those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carried. Anything else?
Five things.
We've had a lot of discussion tonight about the disparity between the definition of bedroom, between the assessor's definition and the city's definition. Is this something that is worthy of our attention right now, or do we just let things go as they are? This is just sort of strange to me that we have this disparity, and I don't know that, generally the marketplace likes certainty, and if we have this uncertainty, I think this is not good for anyone. So I don't have clear direction as far as what it takes to close that disparity.
Well, the motion that is made, and basically you're going with the assessor's definition of the bedroom right now, unless you go back and change it.
Only in certain neighborhoods.
That's true.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Well, let's be clear about this. We had a lot of talk, but did the motion actually say that we used the assessor's figure in all cases?
No.
No.
Okay, good.
So, sir, maybe I could just ask, I know everybody's tired. From your vantage point, what would you see would be the value for us to change the definition of bedroom to match the assessor's definition? Could you go through that one more time?
So it's not as simple as changing a definition because we don't define bedroom. It's mingled out in the code. This pertains to this space and this is a bedroom. So this has to have this ceiling height. This has to have this window. It's not as simple as just creating a new definition or tweaking a word here and there. It would be quite messy, and I think it will mess with a lot of existing properties. It'll be hard to tell what's what. I just had a lady on Story Street. The assessor said that she had 4 bedrooms. We're only counting 3. There's only 3 legal bedrooms there. We went in for an inspection. She says, no, there's 4. It says 4 on the assessors. That's what you told me I have. That is true, but it is not legal for you to have people sleeping there. So it's really hard for us to enforce where people should be sleeping when one place says it's 4, they can market it as 4, but we're saying, okay, it might be 4, but you can't use that to sleep in.
So how did you resolve that?
What was the issue?
Yeah.
So during our inspection process, we have to make sure when we go back for our reinspection that there's nobody sleeping there. Bed's gone, everything's gone.
Yeah.
We know that probably the next day it will all be back there, but we can't control that.
So that was a new LLC.
That was an existing property.
And what was the difference between it not being a legal bedroom?
Ceiling height, and I believe, if I recall, the stairway to get up to the attic was maybe a spiral staircase or something. There were a couple different things that played into it. It has a lot of effects on a lot of different things.
So I just point out that as members of the conference board, we should be looking at this from 2 angles, right? What are the consequences of the assessor using the assessor's definition there? And is that something that might be
Maybe we could
adjustable
change that
within
more
Ames?
easily.
I don't know what the consequences would be, but maybe.
Yeah, that's an interesting thought.
So given your concern that this is going to be extremely messy to work through, that's sort of enough reason by itself for me to hold off on moving forward with this. But again, for those in the audience who think that there's value in this, one side or the other, that would create certainty, that conversation that you just relayed, that here we have a citizen who's trying to reconcile our records versus the assessor, that just feels odd to me. I don't know how we move that to a resolution, but I don't know that we have to do that right now. But it seems like that's something we should close long term.
Mm-hmm.
So I know this isn't what we're talking about, but the zoning ordinance has a bedroom definition that was added in 2010 specifically because of apartments, because we didn't want people claiming something wasn't a place where somebody could sleep and subvert the parking regulations. So that's not what you're talking about. You're talking about essentially single family at homes, it sounds like. But it cuts both ways. We specifically made a broad definition to capture things as bedrooms for parking calculations in 2010. Now, for single family homes, it might be different. And there's different reasons why you call things different things. Single family homes, we don't care when you're building a new home if you have 5 bedrooms or 7 or 3, right? Your parking's 2. It's only when this occupancy thing comes in, or an apartment where the occupancy is important.
Okay, is there anything else that you want to add tonight, or are we done with this?
One other quick one. We previously had kind of a standing request for reports on LOCs in neighborhoods to come back like a couple times a year, something like that. I don't think we need it anymore.
Oh, right. Yeah.
Right? So I just moved to relieve you of the responsibility of giving us those reports.
Is there a second?
I'll second.
Those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carried.
I don't think we've ever given staff less work to do. So.
Well, I don't know that we did
Not
just.
All right. Unless there's anything else, we're going to move on. All right, so just by way of review, the process we're going to go through is that, so one, not to put a definitive date, but are you talking about a month, 2 months? What do you think is, in general, what's going to take to get this crafted so people have an idea about when to start looking for something?
So you had initially said that you wanted us to come back with a draft ordinance, essentially.
Well,
Many of these motions are proposals for this or that. A little maybe clarification on what exactly you're wanting to see.
I think I've got it.
what's that?
Got it?
I got it.
You can tell them the time frame then.
Yeah,
They might not agree with it, but we're gonna give them some.
what I would like to, I think we'd like to see, we want to see, Sarah, is come back with a draft ordinance based on your interpretation.
Okay.
And then I would like to see a 2-week comment period before it even comes to council, okay? So we're going to let people know this is out here, council's going to consider it. It gives people a chance to, to delve into it. Maybe we meet with a realtor, maybe a couple people meet with the realtor board, and maybe we don't. I don't know. The point is, that's the time where we really get into the weeds. This is where council's going to get a chance to look at it. We're going to really talk about it, then come to council meeting where it gets talked about and deliberated on. Not a first reading conversation, and then at that point in time, you have clarity, specificity, so that when we come back the next time with the first ordinance, public comment, wordsmithing is like Scribner error. You know, we missed an O on the word "to" or something like that. We're not changing it conceptually.
Just a point of clarification, you said 2 weeks before it even comes to the council. How do you want to see it the first time then? You want us to bring it to council and explain it, don't vote on it, and then take it out to the public? Or do you mean what did you mean by, you said something before it comes to the council? You want it out in the public. So you want to deliver it to you in an explanation and then take it out to the public? You wouldn't vote on it? Or did you mean somehow take it out to the public first? I missed that first part.
That's what I was communicating was that would not even come to council yet. I think that the point is we could come to council, discuss it, but then we have a 2-week period where you're going to basically really delve into it, and then it comes back again and we talk about it. It's going to add one more meeting. I was just trying to basically make this expedient and try and minimize the amount of meetings. So correction, instead of having 4 more meetings on this, we'll have 5. Once they come back, you'll bring back a draft ordinance. We're going to talk about it. Then it goes out to council. It goes out to the public. They can look at it.
Right.
Then we have one more meeting where we talk about it again and finalize it.
Yep.
Then basically the marching orders are the next time it comes back, it's going to be a first reading.
First reading.
Minor changes. I just want to avoid what we happened last time where we basically kept making changes or we didn't agree with this. And it gives public more than adequate time. And that way, having that first meeting sends a message to people. This is being talked about. And then it gets that review period and that conversation period.
What's very different about this is that this is not a comprehensive plan, that it's an up or down vote. We might well take some of the issues that we brought up tonight and say, now that we've thought about it further, we've received input, then we back off. But I like the opportunity to sort of pick and choose from what we're giving.
Right.
Can I ask for clarification for the public? How many times are they should be expecting to be able to speak to the council in this room about what's been drafted? The first time, the second time,
Well,
definitely
the first time, I just want council talking about it because we're basically making sure that we're all in agreement.
Okay.
And the next time, yes, public input, and then it'll be public input at the first reading, as we always do as well.
Right. Okay, so the first time is really an introduction for the council and the public, no comment.
Right.
You'll have 2 weeks, whatever the schedule is, roughly 2 weeks.
And if we have 3
put
weeks.
it on agenda for discussion.
That's correct.
Okay.
Yeah.
Seems very fair.
And that way, we're trying to make sure people have the opportunity to dialogue on it and chew on it. And we have a chance to chew on it, or the council does. Because maybe, like you said, Tim, maybe it's, we're not really sure we really buy into that. So, okay. All right.
So last meeting, we punted on vacation rentals and we said we were going to have that discussion when we started talking about that. Do we want to have that discussion at a later point in time? How do we want to address vacation rentals? They're still not permitted.
Nope, they're.
I want to have a discussion at a later time.
Yeah.
My,
maybe
my,
later.
my
So-
preference is, I would suggest to council, you can overrule me, obviously. I would suggest that we get this ordinance back, think about it, look at the vacation rentals, and that becomes that's part of our conversation on the agenda when we get this draft ordinance in and look at hearing that.
That's fine.
Yep, I'm okay with it. I
Yep.
just wanted to
No,
make sure we addressed it.
So we make sure that
Do we
we.
have the horsepower though tonight to come up with something?
Oh, he's not asking to do it tonight, right?
No.
No.
No, I mean, we have the
Not-
staff report that we kind of just didn't do anything with, so I don't think we're prepared to do anything with it tonight, but
No.
we still have to address it.
So I guess I didn't quite follow. You're saying that the intent is to discuss it at the evening of the first reading on the rental code changes?
The first
Of the
discussion.
draft.
The first discussion, not
Yeah.
the first reading.
First discussion.
Once we
Of
hone
the
in on
draft rental
what this is
code.
going to look like.
Before it goes out to
So,
public
so the first
What-
meeting, Aaron, the first meeting where we unveil these changes, want to place the vacational rental discussion back on that meeting.
That's right.
But no direction on what to draft, because we've
No.
drafted
No,
one
no,
previously.
we haven't had that discussion.
No,
Okay,
no.
it'll just be a
no-
discussion item, but no draft materials other than the
But
staff.
based on the
report that you've
staff
gotten.
report.
You already have
Yes.
that. Right. No more work on your part. It's just taking that report. We're going to have a conversation again on that. Yes.
Okay.
All right. Good. All right. Moving on. Next item on the agenda, disposition of communications to council. We have one email from Mason Adams from Lion Energy, and that is basically
It's for
a
information.
information only. Council comments. Gloria? Sorry,
None.
tonight.
We have none tonight.
David?
Nothing for me, thanks.
So this is a bit deja vu, getting the team back together again for a discussion.
Everyone.
And I want to appreciate people for the civility with which they presented their ideas. I think it was a healthy discussion, and I'm pleased with the deliberation we had. So thanks for your involvement.
Chris?
Nothing tonight?
Yep, I have one. This is a follow-up. I mentioned I would be bringing back some thoughts on e-scooters, and I understand that Steve and the mayor brought up this topic at their meeting at Iowa State recently, and that there was willingness to at least think about the topic. So at this point, I would like to move that we direct staff to form a committee that would presumably, and Steve can come up with the committee, but I presume it would be, police, legal, Iowa, and including Iowa State, to explore the regulation of micro mobility modes. So that's e-scooters, e-bikes, in Ames and on campus, and then report back to council on any consensus that they reach.
Second.
Any discussion?
So there's going to be some work involved in this, and I think you have to have at least a level of interest in this to really move forward this. I'm going to be a hard one to persuade on this. We worked very hard to create the multi-trail system we have. We're getting feedback from around the country of concerns of pedestrians and cyclists, of the influx of these. I think they may work in larger metropolitan areas that perhaps have better infrastructure, but we're spending so much money and effort on creating these good multi-use trails. I worry about the impacts of these. So I'm going to be a hard sell. And if you're interested in this, then we should go forward. But if you have reservations, this is the time before we start down the path.
Right, we're going to spend a lot of time on this, so if you don't want to do it, tell us now.
Well, just by way of recap, Iowa State has been approached by a scooter company. They end up saying no scooters on campus. I think Steve said he just met with someone last day or two on someone that wanted to bring scooters. Tim, to your point, or to your, I think this is important. We need to really get our arms wrapped around a policy, because someday someone's going to come in and drop 500 or 1,000 scooters in Ames and then take off. And I think it's better to be proactive and try to have some kind of a structure in place. And Steve said that there's actually, now they have the technology with GPS and all these scooters that your scooter dies when it goes onto campus, or you can't ride on certain streets, for example, but you can other places like the multimodal trails, for example. But I don't think we want to have this clutter of scooters all of a sudden coming in here by someone. We want to have some people, if it comes,
Be controlled.
be controlled and have it so we have for safety, for aesthetics. And this is the opportunity, I think, to do that. And Dr. Winterstein and Henry Kane committed to having people on the committee as well, too, to talk about it, because I think they want it's coming, and we want to make sure we respond to it. So.
So my question is, do we know if someone were to come to town and dump a bunch of scooters on the street, is that legal or illegal here? Do we know?
What's that, Mark? They could dump them. You're saying could they ride them?
Well, right. Yeah.
You get by riding streets.
Dump is probably a very, I use that term, they gently place them into a location.
So thanks for the clarification.
It's a fuzzy area. I think we have various, traffic regulations and rules about, using the streets. I mean, some of these, they've gone into some cities and just, plop down the stands with the scooters in them, on the sidewalks, or, and you can't do that here because you can't, you have to have a temporary obstruction permit to be on the sidewalk, to set up a stand on the sidewalk. So, but the scooters themselves, there's probably nothing prohibiting them from running. If they had the scooters based on private property somewhere, and so they could probably do it.
So they probably drive on city streets.
Right.
In off-road paths through parks, we might have regulations prohibiting motorized or whatever vehicles. On bike paths, what do you think about sidewalks? Could they ride on sidewalks? I forgot if we can use I don't know if I use the word motorized, but
I don't think we can't use motorized vehicles on sidewalks.
I think there are some issues you want to explore, whether or not we ever have a company that does for rent scooters or e-bikes. They are coming for private ownership. And so there are some rules we better establish,
That's
even
true, too.
for private use of them. Even if, I'd love to eventually get a for rent one here too, but there's issues either way that I think would be good to look into.
They're here already.
They're here.
My
Yes.
11-year-old has a small one that he can ride all the way across the neighborhood.
So, just a point of clarification, when you say what was the term you used?
Micromobility.
Micromobility.
So would that also include skateboards?
It can, they also make motorized skateboards as well. And that,
Because frankly, that is a grave concern to the university because they already have them on campus.
Yeah, they
and they're
exist.
actually they're concerned about people's safety.
Well, they have those, what do you call them, hoverboard thingies.
yeah.
And then they have motorized skateboards, motorized bikes now, of course, scooters. Those are all, I think, a way of the future too, though, when we look at sustainability as well. But anyway, that's probably enough.
So the point being is this is also not meant to be put them in a little tiny box, but it's safety, it's concern, and the point is
Primarily safety, probably. Yeah, exactly.
And I think students will be probably engaged in that conversation too. Would you agree,
I would
Steve?
think we have to get students.
Student government.
Yeah, soon.
I'd love to hear their take as well.
Yep.
Tim, I share your concerns, but I have to agree with the mayor that everything that I have heard says that communities that don't get out ahead of this are the ones that are having the most problems. And so I appreciate the need to explore this and find out what's being done and what would work for Ames in regulating any kind of micromobility.
So when we say get out ahead of, that can mean either we get out ahead of and say, we're not going to allow this, or we get out ahead of it and say, we're going to allow it and invite it. So what is the purpose of the?
I mean, I think
Simon?
Yeah.
I think it's to get know it's coming and get out ahead of it to regulate it.
Like I said, there's already motor assist bikes out there.
exists,
So
yeah.
you're going to tell Skunk River they're going to stop selling those bikes. I doubt it's
under your terms. See if you make terms acceptable, maybe you won't be able to, right?
I think some communities, Tim, are saying that they will not allow any more licenses issued for motorized scooters than 500 or 250, or they're trying to control it so you don't have this overabundance. And personally, I think that's very intriguing from the standpoint of this one company. They said they had GPS that if you didn't return your scooter to a specific location where they are actually in a bike stand, they have your credit card information. They fine you $100 a day on your credit card. So I think those are the kind of controls you want to have in from vendor requirements so that we can have that opportunity to have them here, but also not have chaos, reigning, around there. So,
Well, I spent a lot of time at 8 Hayden, and I see the conflict between walkers, moms with kids, and cyclists there now. And there's already a lot of tension there. And so you add that component.
But you could establish,
prohibit that.
they can't ride on those. And you can actually lock them out. No, that precisely can lock them out from riding on those paths.
I don't want everybody to get really excited about that because I have also been a part of discussions that say that only works to a certain extent. And so it's a wave of a future, but the wave is just starting. And so that's why I think it's important that we investigate
Yeah, I don't think there's
what can be done.
Expiration.
Because I am not overly optimistic that the controls are as good as the companies are saying.
They're guaranteed. Those in favor of the motion?
Aye.
Opposed?
Nay.
Okay, motion carried. Anything else?
Nope, that's all. Thank you.
Amber?
Nothing.
Devin?
I have a few. So I've talked to a lot of people in the last few weeks about rental housing and the like. And I realized that a lot of the issues that I sent in an email to you all are either things the city would have find a hard time regulating, or the interest isn't all there. So I'd like to make a few statements on a few of the issues and see if there's interest in recommending those things to the campus community commission to look into ways they can discuss with landlords, with renters, to try and find solutions for a lot of these issues. The first we talked about tonight, regulating mold and vermin as health hazards, was what I wrote in the email, but in this case it would be working with them to make sure people are aware of their rights. Impact analysis and discussion with landlords on lease gap solutions. While the city could direct staff to have those conversations, I'm sure the interest is probably more in the direction of having the campus community commission do that. They're already doing that, so I don't really know if it is entirely a good idea to recommend that they continue to look into it. But it's definitely probably the top concern of students when it comes to rental housing in Ames, and so I think it's really important that that gets discussed in trying to get the market in Ames to change from year-long leases to 9-month or month-to-month type situations.
So Devin, do you have like a long list? I mean, do you want to be making a motion on an item by item or the whole list?
I can say them now. I'm going to talk about the ones that I think would be good, and then you guys can either say, no, I don't think that one should be, or it should be, and then, I think that is up to you all. Because
Devin and I talked about this before the meeting, and I suggested that he did a lot of work and appreciate all the recon he did. He really endeavored to try and understand what's going on with the students. If I might just interject and suggest that his email with those 9 different points, if that could just say, refer that to Campus and Community Commission. Because what's interesting is that right now, council has given Campus and Community Commission, the direction to assess the state of student, tenant, and landlord relationships in Ames, including what information landlords commonly wish students had, vice versa, where rental information resources exist. And I did share with them too that, we talked with the student government about the lease gap issue. We said that we really don't have any jurisdiction. However, if they're going to be facilitating meetings between tenants, landlords, at the university, Dr. England is on the committee, which is fantastic, being director of residence. And so it just seemed that this would tie in really well. And maybe they say we can't do anything on these issues, but at least it's something that Devin's done the groundwork. And according to Brian, who's our staff liaison, he said the commission is getting updates from ISU students who are considering an independently operated rental aggregator and review website. And they're also planning forums with students and forums with landlords to discuss their perspectives.
That's good.
So this really ties in well. And actually, Devin's done some great background work that they already got a leg up on in terms of all the information. So Anyway, I think that you want to kind of hit the high points, what was included in that. If you
So
want
you think we just refer the whole email to campus and community?
I think that'd be okay. I think they're good discussion items, all
For
of them,
review.
to talk
Yeah.
about.
There are a couple that I probably wouldn't recommend. For example, closing lease loopholes. I don't think there's anything the Campus Community Commission could do on that. Maybe they could, maybe I'm wrong. When it comes to things that I think would be more decisions by the cities, like right to legal counsel for housing, that's something the city would have to do and spend money toward in providing essentially a right to legal aid in that sense. And so that's not something necessarily that the Campus and Community Commission would have the power or resources to even begin.
However, you did say these are concerns from the students.
True.
I just think it's good to give them the whole.
Yeah,
list,
I agree. I think
it's
and they can
worthwhile.
decide what they can and can't do.
Good point. Yeah, I agree then.
I think
We can recommend the email as a whole to the commission, and that is up to you all.
Yeah, so
if it's agreed to this, I would ask you then send that email to Brian Phillips. He can then transmit it to the Kansas Community Commission with the idea that this is research that's been done for information, and we're not giving them anything other than just that background information.
Correct. Okay. Yeah, I can.
So I would move that we refer the email to the Campus and Community Commission.
Second.
Okay. Those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? And again, thank you. You did a lot of work. I know you put a lot of time in. You did a lot of, you were proactive in giving it to us ahead of time. And there's really not much we can do from a ordinance standpoint, but I think it's great to have this. And it's very timely, by the way, with Campus Communication.
Cool.
Anything else?
There are a few that I think the council could potentially have input on. Really, the only one left that I haven't talked about tonight is ADA requirements in rental housing. The only thing I could think of was if there was a program from the city to subsidize on an individual basis for people who don't have the affordability to rent in one of these, very limited places where there is both a ramp and an elevator within the building complex that is accessible to the individual. Because there are places or situations in Ames where people have a very hard time renting in Ames at places that are accessible to them with their individual needs. And I get that that's a huge commitment from the city if they to do something like that, and it opened up a lot of concerns. But I think I'd be amiss in not mentioning it all because I do believe genuinely that there is something the city can do about it.
Okay. That's part of the email though, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Because then the CCC could also come back and say, we think that this is a significant issue.
Okay.
And then council could take it up at a future date versus trying to refer at this point in time.
Yep. That sounds like a completely reasonable.
So it's not being left undone. It's just more or less, let's follow the process. So.
Sounds good.
Anything else, Devin?
Nope. That's it. Thank you.
All right. Ready for a motion to adjourn?
No, we have 2 more minutes.
I want the record to show that I said 9 o'clock and we're at 8:58.
Move to adjourn.
We are adjourned.
Everybody.
Everyone now.